Good evening. The meeting will now come to order. Sylvia, would you like to take roll call?
Chair Myers?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Here. Thank you.
Okay. Beth Cook? Here. Rachel Shoney?
Here.
Doug Scott?
Here.
Larry O'Keefe? Naomi Bella? Here. Thank you.
Thank you. We are going to need to table approval of the July 10th and 12th meeting minutes. Those are not yet available. So now I am happy to open the floor to any public comment. So you can feel free to come up and address the committee with any thoughts or questions or concerns. Come on up. Oh, do we need time? Okay.
I know a few people aren't here yet that did want to comment, so.
Yeah, we've allotted 40 minutes. So, I mean, if they're not trickling in, we'll. Go ahead, Nancy. Button up.
Here comes Harry Potter. Make it work. Do it.
Yeah, it sounds like it's working.
It did as soon as he walked over this way. I told you he has Harry Potter abilities. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is. Again, I think everyone's told you all this, but congratulations, and wow, this is really a big job. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about what you talked about in the very first meeting. I couldn't come to the last one. I'm sorry. I have to sleep occasionally. Who knew? The District of Columbia and living wage. I've been very proud of what they've done. I know our minimum wage here is rather high in Oregon, and I would be even prouder if the city of Sherwood would take a piece of this on. I don't know what piece you want to take on, but there seems to be a piece you could take on that said, if you're going to come here and you're going to do business, we have a lot of other fine companies here, and we want you to be at least as good as they are, if not better, because we have pride, and we hope you have pride. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to comment this evening? Okay. Tom, I think we'll just go ahead and start with new business, and then if some folks trickle in, perhaps we can open up public comment a little bit later.
I know there was some people that just walked in. Were you guys interested in any public comments? Because we were just about ready to close those, and I know there's.
The invitation, but no thanks.
Okay.
Is this, from a point of clarification, is this something we can decide to reopen later without being afoul of any rules of order or anything?
Your meeting is entirely up to you to
Okay,
determine
good.
how you want to run. So,
Thank you.
as long as you have majority of the members, and yeah, you can open it up till 2 o'clock in the morning if you want.
I can't.
So I want to actually, this is my item, so I want to make sure I'm clear on what the question is here. So this is a question that we have kind of talked a little bit about before, about whether or not we can draft ordinances says related to construction of new buildings and developments. So what exactly is the question here?
I think in our last meeting, what we discussed was whether or not, as a committee, we could make a recommendation to council requesting new developments, new construction, implement better or best construction practices as it pertains to sustainability and natural resources, LEED certification, that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah, so here's my thoughts on this. I did think about this a little bit, and this is I'm kind of going to make a general comment here, not just specifically about this one issue. There's a few things that I think aren't practical, number one. So given the time frame that you have, we can certainly put together ordinances that pertain to things that are outside of Chapter 16. If you're talking about lead buildings or new types of buildings or other things, those are all going to be determined in the land use process. And the land use process, requires DLC denotification. It requires public hearings before Planning Commission and then Council, and the clock will run out way before that even happens. So there's a practical consideration there. There's also, whether or not this was what Council wanted. They said business regulations, and in the ordinance or in the resolution that they passed, they said, there were 3 items that had been discussed, and those were, the 24-hour operations businesses, the camping overnight, and then the living wage or the Workers' Bill of Rights or whatever that. There was a lot of different things. They didn't limit you to those things, so certainly you can go outside of those areas. But it didn't sound to me like that was really where they were thinking this committee would go. And the third thing is, there's a committee that's already in place to do that. Mm-hmm. So to some sense, if you start getting into Chapter 16 and things that are in Chapter 16, then you're going to be stepping all over the Planning Commission toes and the committee that Council has already put in place to address those kind of issues. And so I think, and I haven't talked to the attorneys about this, but I would really be concerned, especially if you start going down the route of preparing an ordinance that might be somewhere in Chapter 16, because land use, our land use rules are completely different for records management than they are for something that Council would do, because we have to keep records of everything that comes in and put them in a certain format in case it's ever appealed to LUBA. Mm-hmm. So all that information is tracked differently. We'd have to staff this differently. We'd have to do a whole bunch of different things. And I'm not sure that would even be, it certainly wouldn't be a best practice, because we have a planning commission that's supposed to be considering those matters. They have a process in place. There's a type of procedures that have to happen so that if we're ever appealed, we can defend the case. And so if we started getting into Chapter 16 stuff, I just don't see how that is really going to be timely, probably not what was asked for, and is really probably going to be problematic because there's a group that's already going to do that. So my thought on that would be is if you guys have things that you would like to see, then maybe you can come up with some recommendations on things to consider potentially. Say, well, Council, we really think that, lead certification is something that should be looked at, and maybe that would be something you could add to the Planning Commission's, list of things to do. But rather than trying to pursue an ordinance, which is, as I think I told you before, you got 4 or 5, you aren't going to make it in time for that one anyway. I think we know that. So maybe what you can do is, if you have time, think about, okay, well, these are some recommendations that we might have that for future conversations and other processes that may be able to be put through the Planning Commission. So those are kind of my thoughts.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Any comment or discussion on committee about anything Tom said or thoughts?
Only that I think, and that's a good clarification for me, but I would probably be inclined to move on to our agenda items for, what was it tonight, living wage?
Okay. Anyone else? Great. So the next line item on the agenda is a discussion related to crafting an ordinance that would effectively promote and produce family wage jobs within the city of Sherwood. So, with that said, I think I'd like to start with a few opening comments. I had an opportunity today to make a quick phone call to a gentleman who recently posted on his blog a Sherwood real estate market update. His name is Steve Tooley, and he gave me permission to share some thoughts that he had. One of the things that he expressed to me were that there are about 14% of the recently closed properties were distressed properties within the city of Sherwood. And I asked him if he had any thoughts or commentary from his buyers about Sherwood and why folks are attracted to this community. And he indicated that as his clients are looking at Sherwood, they identify that this is and has been one of the top places to live in Oregon. He said that his clients comment regularly on the feel of Sherwood. He also indicated, conversely, that about 85% of Sherwood residents commute outside of Sherwood for work, which is concerning, given that we already have a significant amount of vacancy within the city. He has been a resident of Sherwood since 1998, and he really supported a lot of the work that we've already done and the ordinances that we're looking at in terms of limiting overnight parking and camping and those sorts of things on public properties. And he also indicated that he was a proponent of some of the other ordinances that we will be discussing, including but not limited to limiting additional big box stores within Sherwood, as well as limiting 24-hour business operations within the city. He said what he and his clients would like to see is a continued effort to promote a family-friendly Sherwood. So, with that in mind, and in an effort to really focus in on our agenda item tonight, I'd like to open up discussion on committee about how we feel like drafting this ordinance makes sense for the city.
Can I go first? I just wanted a clarification from Heather, because you were going to check into the legality of where we sat with the living wage and affecting the minimum wage. As I currently understand, the state minimum wage is not something that we can change or affect or override.
I did look into it, as we talked about a little bit on Friday, in ORS 653.017. Basically, local governments are limited in how they can affect the minimum wage. And they're an overall higher than the minimum wage that's set by the state. The city wouldn't be able to just, uniformly apply that in the city. But you could look at doing something similar to what Ashland or Portland, there's other cities that have taken some of those exceptions where there are areas that they can control. So, any of their public contracting that they do or contracts that they have with vendors, requiring those vendors and contractors to pay, a higher than minimum wage to their employees. Or basically also requiring the city itself or other public employers that operate in the city to pay their employees a higher than minimum wage, a living wage. So that's the answer to your question directly related to the minimum wage. So I don't know if that answers your question or.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that gives us somewhere to go.
Okay, thank you.
And I provided you with Ashland's ordinance that they have. I was going to try to pull Portland, and I just didn't have time. I just ran out of time to get the information to you. And there are several other Oregon cities that have ordinances that address it. So we can look into.
So just to be clear, the Ashland ordinance and the Portland ordinance and any ordinance that we could potentially pass would not affect general retail, big box retail, anything along those lines. It really only would affect a public employer or a company directly contracted with the government.
If you're just looking at the minimum wage question. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, it's an open question, and I would need to do more research. I didn't have as much time as I would have liked to look into the question, because basically it talks about wages. It limits you in wages, and then wages is defined as compensation that's paid to the employee. So I didn't really get to delve into the question of, so what if you wanted to look at requiring certain benefits or requiring a certain payment for benefits? Would you be able to do that and still be within the parameters of 653? And depending on how you worded it and how you structured it, potentially you could try to avoid any issues that you had with that. But it's just something that we would need to do more research on. And I think it's also obviously something that you would want to get a lot of feedback from the community on in terms of how that would impact everyone. So, but I don't know if that, hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Thank you, and thank you for that in particular. I think that it is important that we look at, there are things we can do, and it would be, I think, very useful for us to have an idea of particularly the benefits, because we could still accomplish some of those goals of making sure that workers are treated at a certain level. I know that Albertsons and Safeway both provide very good quality benefits for their employees, and Albertsons has already, notified their employees to tell them that, changes to the city are going to be impacting their business and the number of employees they have and the number of hours. So as we're having companies that are already here impacted, I'd like to see us at least explore what we could do under that standard.
Are you suggesting that we take a look at all? Oh, pardon me. Are you suggesting that we take a look at all business? Are you suggesting that we look at any minimum or maximum thresholds, anything along those lines?
I still think that the Washington, D.C. thresholds that they've set, it sets a good standard with their
Okay.
recent passage.
So the standard would be non-union 75,000 square foot or more? I think that's the Washington, D.C. standard.
I believe it was.
And $1 billion in worldwide sales.
Correct.
So that would affect maybe 2 or 3 businesses in town.
And potentially new businesses coming.
Sure.
Right.
So I guess my question then would be, if we feel like this is an important protection for workers in Sherwood, why would we want to limit it so much? It's important to provide protections to, like, for example, there's companies that aren't here now, but that could come here, that are multinational companies that make billions of dollars a year, but their stores operate on 10,000 square feet or 5,000 square feet. Why would we not want to include those workers in a legislation like that?
I think if you find most of those stores, often they do have better benefits. I think you're probably referring to some of the Apples, the Microsoft stores. Often they do, if you look at the types of benefits, they're not bad actors within the marketplace. You look at, so if we're trying to set a floor level threshold, that would be something to consider.
Sure, but this is a legislation that was going to last for who knows how many years. We don't know, we can't predict what other retailers in the future may or may not do to limit it to what we know now and say, oh, well, we know this particular retailer who might come here or might never come here offers great benefits. Well, what about another retailer that becomes popular 10 years from now that operates 10,000 square foot stores and gives terrible benefits? Why wouldn't we want, if we decide that this is something that's important, why wouldn't we want to protect those workers too?
Well,
75,000 square feet seems extremely arbitrary to me and extremely targeted, and I guess that's where I'm struggling. If we think this is important, why wouldn't we want to cover as many people as practically possible?
Well, and I think Washington, D.C. did consider additional different thresholds and then did revisit that and go back to the ones that they set under the...
Yeah, and New Mexico's ordinance is actually much broader. Santa Fe, New Mexico, excuse me. Theirs covers every employer over 25 employees. So they didn't have a lot of exemptions and exceptions for particular businesses or unions or non-unions. They just said, if you have 25 people, then our living wage applies to you. And that, obviously we can't do the wage part, but if we start talking about benefits, here we're talking about thresholds particularly. So I guess I'd be more interested in a if we're going to do anything like this, I'd be more interested in a threshold that covers as many people as possible without, severely damaging the really small businesses. And so I don't know if that's 25 employees or 50 or what the right amount is, but I think the way Santa Fe did it is a lot closer to something I could agree with than the way Washington, D.C. did it.
Well, and I think in times there's ideals. within setting standards for statutes. And there's also, this is something that we have to be keeping in mind that we're going to be crafting for voters to make sure that we need to be able to put forth something that we feel we can pass. And so, at every threshold level, we're going to find support from voters, and others will change. So I think it's also important for us to remember that what we're crafting here is also being crafted as ballot measures that we're going to be putting to voters. So I think while I agree, it would be fantastic if we were able to pass, a standard of that nature. I also am concerned whether or not we would be able to pass it at the ballot.
I'd like to add a couple of comments to both of those points. I had an opportunity to take a look at the San Francisco Small Business Protection Act, and there were a lot of points that were raised within San Francisco's ordinance that I felt like could be really useful for us to explore. As a couple of things that struck me as the underlying basis for which San Francisco passed this ordinance was to really preserve the local character and prosperity of different districts within San Francisco. And I think that given council has provided us this opportunity to better define what City of Sherwood may or may not look like at some point in our future, I think if we craft and look to staff and council to help us craft ordinances that are as specific as we'd like to see, we have a basis upon which Heather and her office can come back to us with suggestions on what might work. I hear what you're saying, Doug, and I think it's reasonable. I think that one of the, as Tom mentioned earlier, perhaps one of the recommendations that we may or may not decide as a committee to recommend to the Planning Commission or Council is looking at requesting the Planning Commission take into account other measurements or apply a different set of criteria to reviewing applications. As we're exploring a main street within Sherwood, and as we're looking at the Sherwood Town Center, all of these things as they relate to protecting and preserving the local character and prosperity of Sherwood, I think makes sense. Anyone else? Rachel, did you want to add anything?
Oh, jeez. I'm double-fisted. I think you'll be surprised that I agree with Doug. I said in the beginning that I'm not interested in targeting a specific business in crafting these ordinances. I believe that we've heard from, in looking at different comments that the public have made, we've heard that a concern is crafting the big picture and where Sherwood is going to be going in the future, and what do we want to see, and what rules do we want them to follow, and what are the footprints. And I believe that trying to target only big box retailers is a mistake. I also think that while Albertsons should be held in high regard for what they're doing, they're a union shop. They offer union as a corporation, which I think makes it a different playing field. The City of Portland passed the Sick Leave Act ordinance, and that is for every single business that does business in the City of Portland. And I think, while I think that that's going to be difficult for the city and for some small businesses, people I know, they did it, and it's a much bigger city than this, and they have a lot more small businesses than we do. I do think that we need to pay attention to the businesses that are already here, but I think we really, really need to pay attention to businesses that come in the future. We just went to a meeting where there's a new development right here in Old Town with retail space, and there are very large companies that can come in and lease a retail space for way less than 6,000 square feet, that are national organizations that don't pay any more than minimum wage, that do not offer more than part-time employment. And so if what we are talking about is accruing sick leave, offering more than part-time, creating a safe and good work environment for workers, it needs to apply evenly. And that's healthy for small businesses as well as large businesses and for future development, in my opinion.
Nicely said. I would agree with Rachel, and I'll,
Closer, Chairman.
closer? Closer. I'd also agree with Doug. I think in reading the handouts that we received on May 31st, on page 7, it talked about the other types of regulations that cities have enacted to create better working conditions. And I know, we've already confirmed that we really can't do anything with wages, but it's my opinion that the last option regarding healthcare standards, we might be able to address some of these concerns of maybe stating it so simply as companies with more than X amount of employees, and I was kind of thinking 50, but, decide on a number, pay a certain amount of health benefits per employee. And then that covers it kind of covers your wage, your compensation, and your benefits all in one package, whether they're part-time or full-time. I think you guys would also agree that there's plenty of businesses. Rachel just mentioned some national organizations that come in here. There are plenty of businesses in Sherwood with more than 50 employees that are paying their employees. It may be a movie theater or a tire store or any number of places that would pay their part-time or very few full-time employees. And I think that's where we need to look at making those sweeping changes for not just business, but the businesses that are going to come to Sherwood in the future.
Thanks, Larry. So, Tom, to ask a question, given your earlier comments, what kind of a recommendation, or I don't even know if an ordinance in this case would be plausible, to perhaps better define how we wish for applications to be reviewed. One of the things that I'm hearing from the three of you in particular is that we do want to see family wage jobs grow in Sherwood in a way that employees are provided relatively clear health benefits and other benefits. And I don't want to paraphrase what you said, Rachel, so jump in. But, one of the things I feel like I heard you say was that you're a little bit concerned about some of the national retailers potentially coming in to Sherwood and not even perhaps maintaining local dollars within Sherwood. Is that a fair? So one of the things that strikes me, Tom, is there a way for us as a committee to establish, with your help, an ordinance that would implement a greater review process for Planning Commission when as new applications are coming in?
Well, I'm a little confused, so let me try to make sure that I understand.
Okay.
Because I think what you're talking about in these type of ordinances really wouldn't be processed through the land use process at all. So I don't think it would be something that would be a condition of approval that would ultimately be on the property, because if it is, then you're only talking about businesses from here forward or new businesses. Everybody else is going to be, existing non-conforming under the code, so it won't apply to them, and then you're going to create this tiered system and a lot of really confusion. So I do think that you can put together an ordinance that covers these issues that you're talking about, as long as they meet all the other criteria, federal, state, RESA, and everything else. But it wouldn't be land use directed. So I do think you have the ability to do this, and without touching planning commission or the conditions on an approval or an application process for development would be my suggestion.
It would just become part of doing business in Sherwood. Was a company coming in would have to look at the ordinances and say, okay, well, if we come here, we have to give X sick time or X dollars of hour per for healthcare benefits, and then they decide whether that's something they want to do and locate in Sherwood, or whether they decide not to and don't locate in Sherwood. But it wouldn't be part of the site plan approval or conditional use or anything like that.
That would be my interpretation of the way that it would work. I think if you tried to pull it into that, it would really be problematic. And so you can do ordinances it would then apply to existing businesses and new businesses and everything equally, although you could stage it in over a period of time for existing businesses if you wanted. And there are some ways to get around the compliance rules that Heather would have to weigh on as we thought about things. But certainly that's what I would recommend. I wouldn't recommend doing it in the land use code, even if you could. I don't think that would be the place to do it.
And I'm happy to support a lower threshold if, the committee feels that would be, conducive, especially if, we have small business support for it, because as, everything you said, having met over the last year and a half with numerous small businesses in Portland, I did a lot of business outreach. When you check with the sick leave campaign, I did a lot of business outreach and meeting with small businesses, and time again, what you said is exactly what I heard from them. They value their employees so highly. They know that their business's success depends or fails. It's on their employees. So what you said just echoes so many of those conversations and makes me proud of our small business owners throughout the country, because that's what I kept hearing over and over again, was the same kind of sentiment from them about how they feel about their employees.
Well, with that said, as we've discussed in earlier meetings, perhaps we should come up with our wish list as a committee and give our city council an opportunity to go back and pull together perhaps some sample ordinances, some language for us to review.
So one of my biggest concerns that if any of you were at the city council work session when we talked about a lot of the ideas specifically for Sherwood is going to be implementing and enforcing it. And when we talked about that, I knew that Boley was implementing Portland's sick leave law. So I talked to the head of the wage and hour division there just to get a sense of, how is this going to work. I also talked to the Portland city attorneys who drafted the legislation. And they were still working on, basically their administrative rules and how it was going to work. And they weren't able to really give me a sense of how it was going to work. And they're actually hard at work on those rules right now. So I think that's a really critical piece, in determining how you want to move forward. And I'd also like to get a sense from them, like how much is it going to cost the city of Portland to do this? They are going to have an IGA with Boley, the Bureau of Labor and Industries. And I don't have a sense of that at all right now, because right now the city definitely doesn't have any sort of mechanism. It's not like it's a traffic issue where you already have police officers who have experience in enforcing that. There's really no one at the city right now. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. But so that's always been one of my biggest concerns. And I know it definitely can be something more of a longer term goal that you have. Like short term, it's going to be really hard to get those answers that you want by the beginning of August. So that's just one of my things that I wanted everyone to keep in mind in terms of drafting that type of ordinance.
So I've actually spoken with Boley, some folks at Boley as well, and they'd be happy to come and talk in front of the committee, just kind of discuss some of the options available as well to us, with us.
As I understand it, there would be the enforcement, the record keeping, and I'm kind of thinking probably a full-time employee, to at least one to implement all this.
I mean, it depends. It depends on what you look at doing. For Boley, it was going to be easy for them to sort of take the sick leave program under their wing because they already have trained wage and hour individuals that work at Boley, and so they're treating it as a wage and hour violation. Presumably, they haven't put the rules out, but that's what they said they were going to do. So. So it would just be a matter of we would have to work with Boley and try to craft it in such a way that it would be, not onerous for them to enforce it.
Sorry, but with all due respect, it isn't really our job to be concerned with that piece, is it? As a special committee, I thought that our job was to craft an ordinance that we felt was going to address the concerns of the citizens, the public, and it's up to City Council whether they want to use that ordinance or not. Am I right? I mean, I get that we shouldn't, ask for, the sky.
I would totally agree with you.
But I feel as
and let the
though-
voters decide whether it's the cost versus benefit for the city of Sherwood in the future.
I feel like if we go down that road, then we are managing the city, which is not our job, it's Tom's, or Joe's, sorry.
We
Well,
But I
Go
feel
ahead.
like what we need to do is craft an ordinance that we feel reflects what we've been asked to do, and then allow City Council to just determine whether that is something they want to tackle. Am I
Sure.
right about
We
that?
could, however, give them information about how it could save the city
Sure.
money. If the employees don't have to enroll in public services or health care. I mean, we can give that information.
I'm not
So it
saying
might
that.
be-
I'm just saying we have such limited time. I mean, I totally hear you, Naomi. I think any tools we can give with our recommendations are great. But at this point, I feel like we're so short on time that trying to do their job as well as ours is going to get us very bogged down. And I feel like where Mirda was coming from, and I think the rest of us is let's get this list, let's get it in place, let's figure out how the language can work, and then get it in front of City Council and let them make the determination about whether they can handle it or can't. And
So-
at that point, I would assume, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
At some point, the public will still be able to make comments to the council once we've set those ordinances in place. Am I correct? Or will there never be?
Well, honestly, I think they go hand in hand. The reason I say that is because I think you're right. Ultimately, it is a policy decision the council will need to make in order to determine whether or not they think it's there's enough benefit in the ordinance to justify the additional whatever that might be in order to implement the ordinance. But as you write the ordinance, you're going to find the way that you write it is going to determine how difficult it's going to be for them to do that. So if you make something that is very cumbersome to implement, then it's probably going to be DOA and you've wasted your time. So you're correct in maybe you don't need to be making all of the decisions because that's something that they're going to need to make, but I do think you need to keep that in mind and at least probably have some sort of thought process of how that might work so that there's some simplicity in the way that that's put together so that it doesn't get to them and they've only got a couple of weeks and 1 to 2 meetings at the most in order to deal with that and then they just can't because it's too the way that it's written it would be so difficult to implement that it wouldn't even be something they would want to refer to their voters.
So Rachel, I agree with what you're saying, but I also know that a lot of the citizens are really concerned about the budget.
Sure.
And a lot of those citizens are the same citizens who are asking for some of these ordinances. So I do think that we at least have to consider, to some degree, the possible budgetary impacts on things that we do. I'm not saying we discount things because of that, but I think to Tom's point, we need to make sure that we're crafting legislation that can be implemented as budget conscious or budget friendly as possible. So I think that is part of our mandate.
And I will say that in Portland, one of the things, it's a complaint-driven process. So they're doing notifications. That will be part of the, they'll undertake a certain notification process to businesses that will be impacted. And then they will be, the actual enforcement will be complaint-driven. So they're not going to be having a staff member who's going to be going out and auditing. It's going to be complaint-driven.
I understand the violations are complaint-driven. Is there a reporting and record-keeping requirement?
Like, for example, if you look at the San Francisco ordinance that I gave you, it has a reporting requirement. So every year, they have to report. So there is, I'm sure,
There's got to be staff
Gotta be
that
a
manages
full-time
that.
person
right?
there. So if
Does
you craft
the
it
Portland
that
ordinance
way,
have that? Do you know?
You can choose. Actually, they're going through rulemaking right now for
So
the
you don't
Portland
know.
process.
We don't know
right.
yet. Okay.
And the cost is on the employer. And it's assumed.
The cost of the public
Yeah.
employee to keep
No,
the records?
keeping, it says here, it's on the employer. It says, it shall be presumed that the employer did not make the required health expenditures for the quarter for which records are lacking. So it's that.
That's if you come to a violation.
Right.
But
So if it's
assuming they're
the same.
reporting quarterly, there's still someone at the city who has to receive those reports and keep a record of them in the database or whatever, right?
I would assume, yeah.
Tom, were you going to say something?
No, I just wanted to switch mics out. This mic is really soft. We have one that doesn't work very well. So
Just wanted to make sure. So to circle back, I feel like it's really important for us to identify the core issues that have been identified not only in our meetings and in our conversations, but by a lot of the comments that we've reviewed that have come into the city via citizen comment. So perhaps we can focus on, again, the issues that we are most concerned about, identify the core issues, and then make a request of council and staff once we've narrowed down, for lack of better terms, a wish list of considerations.
Maybe it would be prudent to start with an amount of employees. And before we do that, I like Tom's idea, the phase-in process, because that would make it kind of easier to draft for everything. And, so that you don't have all businesses doing this on such and such a date. Existing businesses would phase in, new businesses would do it by the time they open. But, yeah, I'd be interested in narrowing down the amount of employees or other parameters.
So I have a question. When we talk about employees, are you only talking about retail employees, or are you talking about other type of businesses as well?
I think it should apply as broadly as possible. I mean,
I was thinking the same thing of all
employment.
businesses with a city license, right?
So what you're suggesting is not only retail facilities, but industrial facilities, office facilities, all across the board? And I'm asking a question, not making a statement.
I think.
I think so. I mean, if we're going to make, I guess, I stutter at the word sweeping changes, but if we're going to make a broad change for the city of Sherwood, then it should include as many businesses as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we're here, and I hear all these comments from the community, and I read the petitions and the comments on there, and what I hear is about, employee rights, employee benefits, wages. Everyone's concerned about those things, so I don't understand why we would draw a distinction between retail, industrial, commercial, or whatever. I mean, an employee is an employee if they're an employee of the city of Sherwood, and we feel like these are important things that we need to do to protect and benefit employees in the city of Sherwood. Why would we arbitrarily decide only this segment is worthy of that protection?
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Beth, do you know why in the DC ordinance they said it does not include banks, conventions, credit unions, educational institutions, franchises, hospitals, hotels, restaurants, saving institutions, and trade shows?
I do not know. I know that
Lobbyists.
I know that they did have a number of lobbyists that were visiting their city hall on a very, very frequent basis.
I just need to understand. I guess I feel like we need to understand what people, this is going to sound so demeaning, and I'm sorry, but we need to understand what doing business in the city of Sherwood means. We're talking about daycare centers, childcare centers, car washes, Pride, Fat Milos. 7-Eleven,
And
Pride
that's
Pantry.
why, I'm sorry, I don't.
I just need that we're clear on what we're discussing, that we're talking about Lindsley Lawn Care. When we're talking about all businesses in the city of Sherwood. And I also want to point out that in Portland's and many of the others, I saw that they also address businesses that are outside of Portland but do business on a regular basis in Portland. Yes.
Not
So
just-
I feel like we need to specifically exempt or include.
Not just in the city of Sherwood, city limits or.
Exactly.
something.
So if it's a
I think
business that
that's why-
operates in Beaverton and employs a lot of people here.
I think that's why it's kind of important to narrow this down to a number rather than a square footage or, wasn't aware of the franchises and credit unions and all that stuff, but I can imagine how that would be hard. Are those employees in the Sherwood area? No, that's a national chain. So, yeah, if we could, what do you guys think about it, narrowing down a number? Would that kind of narrow that parameter down to what we're looking for?
I think it's important first to identify the kinds of properties that we're looking at, and then go into a discussion of numbers if that's where we feel we need to go. There are a number of different kinds of commercial properties, and I feel like that's what we're discussing is commercial properties, and that could include all of the kinds of building types that I mentioned earlier. So let's start with that. Perhaps exemptions to what we feel we would not want to see included, if any. Can you think of anything? Anyone?
Perhaps charitable organizations.
Charitable, okay. So a charitable organization, how would that be defined? A 501c3, as Rachel just said.
I don't know. I've just seen that in some of the other ordinances we've been looking at. I've seen exemptions for charitable organizations, so I just threw that out there as something we may want to consider.
I would probably do it if they're exempt under federal or state law. So it's
Okay.
a nonprofit corporation under state law or 501c3 under federal law.
Okay. Well, we're narrowing. That's good. Larry, go ahead.
I would think bargaining, businesses represented by bargaining agreements,
Or in other words, unionized.
probably probably because it's my tendency to think that unionized workers have a better living wage and better benefits, so I don't think there's any reason to regulate that and try to.
But then why would there be any reason to exclude it?
It's a good point, too.
I could see a phase-in period because there are agreements in place. I mean, so to me, in that case, a phase-in period for existing agreements, and then when their agreement comes up for renewal, then they would have to meet the same threshold that all the other businesses. And if they already meet it, great, it's not a problem,
Step
right?
backwards at some point, yeah. Okay, point taken.
Go ahead.
Is it on? It is. Commercial property, what about people who operate out of their homes and have, I guess I feel like I'm leaning, a little more towards Larry's number of employees. Because I believe that there are businesses operating, oh, sorry.
That's okay.
I don't care whose it is. The idea that there should be number of employees possibly, because there are businesses that operate. I mean, it sounds like if your commercial property could be pretty easy to get around.
And or in Oregon, FMLA applies to 25 or more, or businesses with 25 or more employees. So, I mean, that just to me comes as the first logical number. I'm
Right.
not saying it's the final number, but
Oregon also has OMLA, which is quite a bit more effective than FMLA, by the way. So,
25.
yes.
OFLA's 25 and FEMLA's 50.
okay. They oftentimes call it Oregon FMLA, so that's why I
Yeah,
was confused. But
OFLA.
it was 25. It's 50 federal, right?
Yes.
And 25 in Oregon.
So let's go with that.
And that, I haven't talked to Boley about this, but it also might make sense to tie it into some threshold that they already have. It'll make it easier probably for them to enforce it.
I think 15 and 25 and 50 are currently existing thresholds for a number of different types of workplace policies.
All right, so given those numbers, are we comfortable working with both state and federal numbers for the sake of beginning to craft some kind of an ordinance? Yes? Okay. So we have a threshold. Now, is there any intention or desire to look at the kinds of businesses we're looking at all?
I would say start as general as possible, and everybody, except charitable. I mean, we were talking about exemptions, and I maybe we got off that. Were there no other exemptions?
I think that's part of what the discussion is to narrow down what or what not we'd like to include or not include.
And I think that we'll get, excuse me, I think that we'll gain some, some information from the public. I mean, as we, as that is known, we'll be getting input from businesses, I think, as we have this discussion over the next month, too. So we might get some additional information that comes in from the community related to whether or not we should exempt other types of businesses. But I'd be comfortable with that currently.
Okay. So, to move forward, we're looking at potentially affording employees within the city of Sherwood health benefits.
Well, and I'm not sure
Or
that under the
structure
Affordable
of-
Care Act, if we can specify health benefits, we could potentially specify that they would have a certain amount given towards benefits, but I'm not sure we can specify towards health care. I mean,
We'd want to probably do some more research on that just to see. I want to make sure that if we put a dollar amount to it, that it's not considered wages under the state law, and thus preempting the city from doing that. And when I was doing some of my research, it looked like the city of Chicago enacted an ordinance. It was never actually put into law because the mayor vetoed it. But it was similar to San Francisco. It's the same idea, but it was the way it was structured was it was like you had to have $3 worth of benefits going to each employee. So it was worded a little bit differently, and I think that if you wanted to look at doing something like that here, I would want to maybe structure it more like that to avoid any preemption problems. But I haven't done enough research on, perhaps we could just put a dollar amount to it, and that would be fine, and that wouldn't be considered wages under state law. But I haven't done enough research on that to make a determination.
I think just under federal law, we can't say specifically to health care at this stage, correct?
Well, yeah, we have ERISA issues too. So if we want to get into actually looking at just the benefit part of it, then we also have to make sure we don't have ERISA problems. And I mentioned in my memo that if we do decide to do anything related to healthcare benefits, we'll definitely want to get an ERISA expert to give you an opinion on it. I mean, there's attorneys that's literally all they do is ERISA because it's a very complex law. So
as far as healthcare goes, I certainly haven't read the 1,700 pages of the Affordable Health Care Act, but I do believe there were some exemptions in there that prevented even states from entering into the conversation. And a lot of the reason is because they recognize that a lot of smaller businesses in particular are probably not going to offer health care insurance, choose to pay the penalty and let their employees enter into the exchange. So we could end up getting into a lot of problems with the Affordable Health Care Act because of the way that thing is put together, where they really do expect people that are going to end up in the healthcare exchange. So if you require them to provide a certain amount of benefit directly towards health care, that could really put an employer in a bind because then they wouldn't be able to take that option, and they would have to then get health insurance, and that might make them uncompetitive with other businesses in the area. So I don't know what that means, but I just, with the Affordable Health Care Act coming online, this really gets complicated if you're just in that one issue.
I just, sorry, Tom, were you finished? As a committee member, and many of you may know for personal reasons, I have read all 1,700 pages of the Affordable Care Act, for personal and business reasons. And I will say that for myself personally, as a committee member, I won't support, whether that matters or not, any discussion about a small business operating within the city or any size business having to deal with healthcare ordinances, primarily because it is so overwhelming at this point for us businesses to sort of figure out how we're going to be implementing this and what the cost and who it applies to, that I feel like the city would be opening a can of worms, as we were discussing earlier about trying to pass something that would just be, crazy, pretty much. Already the Affordable Health Care Act, it has a lot of information and a lot of things that it's already tiered somewhat, unphased, I should say. And when I was reading it, I did understand that there were many things that some small businesses were, going to be outside of, and, assumptions made about what they would spend. Possibly this is something that we look at when we talked about earlier in things that we took off the table in suggesting some incentives for businesses within the city of Sherwood that offer benefits to employees who are making lesser incomes or who are working less hours. But I will say that I believe that a way to possibly get around this is to discuss one of the things that I read a lot in comments, which was maintaining an only part-time staff. So that sort of addresses the healthcare in and of itself. If you've got workers who are working full-time hours and not receiving full-time benefits, that sort of takes care of that issue. I guess is where I'm coming from. So maybe if we look at something that's a little bit easier to craft and a little bit easier to understand and pass and for businesses to maintain, as opposed to imposing rules and ordinances about businesses and healthcare, because the federal government's already doing that tenfold.
So would you recommend drafting something that says certain percentage of businesses over such and such amount of people have to be full-time? Or do you have like some sort of specific?
I don't actually have any idea how that would happen. I think it's more, I think, Larry, more to the point is offering, is when you have the opportunity to have a position be full-time and you are purposefully making that two part-time positions. I think that's more of the issue. I have no idea how you regulate that, but I think that's more what we're talking about. I mean, for instance, I don't have any full-time staff.
Sure.
And people enter into my business primarily because of those hours. So saying to me that I have to have a certain percentage of employees, I know this 25 wouldn't apply to me, but for a restaurant, for example, that could be. I mean, there are employees who wouldn't want to work full time.
They don't want to work full time.
Right. I mean,
in some
so
cases.
I don't. That's not necessarily what I think should happen, but I guess what I'm saying is that might be an easier way than legislating healthcare requirements.
And I think this is going to become really interesting in the next couple of years nationwide, because I think all of this Affordable Care Act and its implementation and how that affects full-time and part-time employment across all kinds of business sectors. This is just a general comment. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. There's a lot of speculation from a lot of people on a lot of different outcomes, and it's going to be interesting to see what actually comes to bear. And I've thought about the part-time, full-time thing, and how could you craft an ordinance that would try to address that and be something that could be managed by the city, and I'm open to the ideas, but I've been racking my brain and I haven't come up with any great, fabulous ideas. So I hope the rest of you have.
So, I mean, I agree it's complicated, but I do think that one of the things I heard over and over from residents, or from citizens around the community over the last several months, is they're very concerned about businesses that do use it as a business model, and they were talking large scale businesses where they're using a model where they use primarily part-time workers, in essence requiring our tax dollars to subsidize their profit margin. And that was just something that I continued to hear over and over and over again from folks that they didn't feel that was a a business model that they wanted to support within our community. So if there's a way for us to find to address that, while complicated, I think it'd be worthwhile.
What's your numbers when you have an employer that's employing, maybe Fat Milo's has 5 or 6 employees, I'm guessing, right? And then you have a large retailer that has hundreds. That drain on our human resources, and just for us to pay all of the healthcare costs for that many employees through our tax dollars is just so much greater. So that's what we're addressing, I think. Another thing I'd like to talk about is a lot of people wrote on those petitions that they wanted to somehow see a dependable schedule so that if you're employed part-time, you can go and get another job because you're working these hours at a whatever the business is, small or large, and then you're able to go out and get another job to supplement. And that's more the issue than the wage or the benefits. It's, because if you're earning money, you have a cash flow, at least you can work around the wage and sometimes the benefits. So
I think that's a really valid point, Naomi, and I would agree that I think that it's important in all that we do to promote residents living in Sherwood to have opportunities to also work within Sherwood. So having those opportunities and dependable schedules well aligns itself to having a fair or a dependable schedule and a clear amount of hours to depend on. So that it sounds like, that's something that we could potentially look at. Heather, can you comment on that?
We could. I'm not familiar with any other municipalities that have anything like that, so that would take a lot longer probably to put together, just because we don't have anything to go from. But if anyone has ideas for examples of other cities that have done something like that, you can send the examples our way. That would be useful. I haven't really done any research on how you would go about implementing that. So, just if it's something on your list, your wish list, we'll look into it, see what we can put together.
I certainly spent some time on the internet trying to find some previous examples, and also was not able to find anything in this sphere. So that concerns me because we're creating something novel, which can be really great, but it can also mean we end up in court and defending it, or spending a lot of time drafting it to begin with. So, not saying stop the conversation, but something to think about.
I have 2 points. One, that was the clarification on the comments from the citizens was a work schedule that would be structured 2 weeks in advance. Is that correct?
I don't recall.
I know Naomi's probably read far more than I have, but I know, not all said a set amount of time, but I just think that was a general sense that being able to know that know your schedule in far enough in advance that you could be adding additional work.
It's my understanding that there are, and I haven't talked to any recently, my experience knowing people that work for grocers and stuff, they have their schedule set like 7 days in advance. And it may be less than that, but I think that's about the average. It seems to me like pushing that out a week is not going to be a hard thing for people to do. Or, just, it would be that simple of an ordinance. Does that sound like it's really difficult, that would be difficult to do?
I would imagine it looking like a union provision. There are collective bargaining agreements that have, there's a lot of language in most collective bargaining agreements about scheduling, like how the scheduling is done and how far in advance it has to be done, and, certain hours and, issues for different types of employees. So that would probably be where I would start if I was drafting something. So it would look similar to what a collective bargaining agreement looks like, language in collective bargaining agreement.
And then the challenge for the city would be the enforcement aspect, and whether if there's any kind of reporting requirement or whether it's a complaint-only driven system. and how those complaints would be handled and investigated, I guess.
And I do think, given potential budget constraints, that a complaint-driven process, given the size of our city, is probably best. I mean, I am concerned about cost as well, for enforcement. So I do think that a complaint-driven process, where the penalties are potentially paid for typically by the employer in cases where there is a problem, would probably be the best method to pursue.
Does BOLI also contract for investigation? So if the complaint came in, they would also investigate it as well as?
Well, they do their own investigation, so it is complaint driven. And so for Portland, they're going to have an IG. They'll have a contract with them, and they agree to enforce it, the sick leave law for Portland. So I don't don't think they contract out with other cities that I know of. From when I talked to them, because I was trying to get a sense of what the IGA was going to look like, and they said, well, we really don't know. So I wasn't sure if they had done something, I don't think they've done anything similar with another city, but I didn't confirm that.
So the process isn't that, well, obviously it's not in place yet, but we're envisioning a process where the complaint goes directly to BOLI? Or does it come into the city first?
They haven't worked.
I guess I'm asking Beth as much as like what's she envisioning.
Well, and I'm not part of the rulemaking process for that, but that is my understanding that it would go to BOLI, because there's no office currently within the
so
city.
So the complaint would come to BOLI, and they would investigate it themselves, and then assess a fine if necessary, and then there's got to be some sort of appeals process, I imagine, and then. Obviously, the city then pays BOLI, whether it's time and materials or some monthly contract or something.
I think they're setting a threshold level, like for maximum amount of outlay. Is that? Are you fine?
When I had talked to them before, so I'll
Okay.
talk to them again. They had just started the process because they were waiting on the state law, and they didn't want to do any work if the state was going to pass the law. So they were just in hold mode when I talked to them. But I would talk to them again and see. Hopefully, they made some progress. Hopefully, they would make all the rules, and then we could just.
And the challenge with this one compared to the sick leave policy is that is not. I mean, the sick leave policy, they already gather information about and have, like you talked about earlier, a process in place for the wages and hours kind of. Whereas the idea of the scheduling probably would be a completely new process for them to undertake, right? As far as we know.
It would. I mean, we'd have to see if that's something that they would entertain. I don't know, because I didn't talk to them about that before. So that's something that they would could look at it, in a sort of wage and hour. The way BOLI is set up. So they do investigations, and they have basically two arms. They have the civil rights division, and they investigate basically the civil rights violations, and then the wage and hour division, and all of the laws that have basically been considered wage and hour. So they have this sort of, two hats of types of investigation. So if we wanted to sort of use their existing structure, we would want whatever we crafted to fall under either of those sort of umbrellas. And I think that logically the scheduling would fall under a wage and hour. I would logically put it there, but I have to ask BOLI.
For the benefits portion, could we say if they are paying it under affordable care, they're exempted from whatever ordinance, so that way we could get to the part-timers, so we're making sure that they're gaining the benefits package without, so if we could say this is, applicable unless they are exempted under.
So that would be a separate question of looking at whether the part-time employees were getting health care benefits.
Again, I think a lot of the concern that's been expressed within the community is that business model where they're using primarily part-time workers, and then the costs that then accrue to the taxpayers.
Mm-hmm.
Where that wouldn't be the case if someone was full-time and then they were going to be getting health care underneath the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah, and I kind of circling back to something Rachel said earlier about healthcare, and I agree with her that this is an area that I'm really hesitant to even enter because there's so much law and complexity and infrastructure and bureaucracy both at the federal and state levels, and while I don't disagree that there's standards that maybe could be improved in all these areas, I think that those standards should be improved at the federal and state levels. And I think taking them up at the local level is problematic.
And I will say that you have to take baby steps in order to get to state and federal level. In order to get those types of things at the state and federal, you have to make you have to have those early adopters who make that, blaze the trail, essentially. And I think that our community has really spoken out loudly that these are things that matter to us and matter to the people, surrounding us. So I think it's really important that we take that into consideration. I mean, we're not going to pass a federal standard tomorrow because, we want it. It happens, baby steps along the way. You mentioned Chicago, the Walnut enacted, they went through that process. New York City, there's, folks that are Washington, D.C. last week. I mean, they're blazing that trail. And I think there are many of us who do see that that's an important federal standard, but we also recognize that you have to take baby steps to get there.
Well, and additionally, I would add that larger businesses are far more capitalized than smaller businesses or mom and pop shops. So a larger business would have a stronger ability by way of financial ability to absorb some of those startup costs and maintenance costs and employee costs rather than some of our small businesses. So along the lines of what both Rachel and Beth, I think we're getting at is crafting language, deliberate language, that outlines in particular how we would like to see our labor force supported in Sherwood.
So can I give you kind of an example? I read through the Washington, D.C. Engrossed bill, and if you took a look at carefully, they made a couple of attempts to define large retailer, and they may have made more attempts than what they did, but when they were considering this, they defined large retailers means any business excluding franchisees which operate a retail store located within the geographic boundaries of the district where the parent company's gross revenue total $1 billion or more on an annual basis. So the key there is excluding franchisees, because if you were to take a look at Sherwood, when you're talking about companies whose parent company earns more than $1 billion, and I just kind of started listing things off my head, and I didn't actually go out, but you're talking about Home Depot, Target, Kohl's, Petco, Safeway, Albertsons, Pizza Hut, Domino's, Papa Murphy's, Unleashed by Petco, McDonald's, Taco Bell, KFC. So anything that's really a franchise, kind of falls into that category, and there's, I've got 20 more here. That would fall into that. So they had a fairly large, probably, list to start with, and so then they went back and redefined that to basically, have the 75,000 square foot limit and the $1 billion revenues on a more annual basis, and that would cut the list down to Home Depot, Target, and whoever else might come in. So it's really important as you consider these things, what you're talking about, because they had a couple of different things there, and certainly if you're looking to, for local small businesses, if you took out the franchisee part, you get pretty much all the franchises, which is, I think, was kind of what you were talking about.
I guess I'd want to make sure that our thresholds were we weren't excluding franchisees, where we could, and then including locally owned at the same time. So that's where I think that it is important to have some of those thresholds. So maybe we would set our base threshold at a level that takes that into account.
I would agree. I think that makes sense. What do you think? Any other thoughts on that?
So you're saying raise the threshold level, or I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
I would not want us to exclude franchisees if we're going to, we'd want to make sure the threshold level doesn't hit. We want to make sure that it's equal. It's an equal playing field. So just because someone is an independent if they have the same number of employees as a franchisee, we just want to make sure that we're clear as far as who's going to be covered. It's not going to be hitting a locally based versus a franchise, any differently.
Yeah, because in that example, it would have included Home Depot, Target, Kohl's, Petco, Safeway, Albertsons, but not like Pizza Hut, Domino's, Papa Murphy's. It would have included Unleashed by Petco, but not McDonald's, because so there is a difference. Whether you're a corporation who's running your own store, or whether you're a small business or smaller business owner who might have 4 or 5 franchisees in an area, or maybe even just one. So.
I feel like we're jumping around a lot here. We're jumping back and forth from thresholds, and then we're talking about healthcare benefits, and then we're talking about scheduling and hours, and maybe we talked about sick leave a little bit as well. And I feel like we're not very focused on making any progress in any one particular area. So I don't know what the rest of the group thinks, but I feel like maybe we should pick one area and really try to hone in on what we want to do in that area, maybe after a break. But that's just a suggestion.
And I think that we know we can't do wages, so I think it'd be valuable for us to hear from the attorney, after possibly some additional research, what can we do related to benefits? Since we know we can't possibly do directly related to health care under the Affordable Care Act, but what can we do?
So maybe we should table that till we get an answer back in a following meeting and talk about sick leave or some of the other things instead?
Or possibly wanted to continue the discussion tonight regarding thresholds.
I just need to be clear. Are we not including franchisees, or are we including franchisees?
That's what we haven't decided.
Okay. I thought that there was some sort of...
I don't think we've taken a vote on anything.
Okay.
Just kind of maybe to help here a little bit, I think I would target your efforts on what you want the ordinance to be, and then worry about the threshold conversation later, because I think whatever you choose is probably going to inform you about what that threshold might be, because it may apply just to retail, it may apply more broadly to the industrial sector or other business as well. And so I think if you could focus on what it is you want, it'll probably help you when you actually try to get to that threshold question to figure out how you want to apply that. So that would just be a thought. Maybe delay the threshold conversations until you have a good idea of what it is you want to tackle, and then that might be easier for you to understand.
So then we would need to wait to hear back from the attorney on what is the possible.
Well, but we know that sick leave is possible, which is Portland has it, right?
Sick leave.
Yes, we do, and we also know that you can apparently contract with Bully to do it for you. I'm a little concerned about how much Bully is going to get off of certain things, how much they want to become an independent contractor for small cities like Sherwood. Portland's a lot bigger than we are, and certainly they were open to that, which is a little bit surprising, but that's good. And so, maybe they will, maybe they won't. I really don't know, and I think that's where Heather needs to talk to them. But certainly under the sick leave, they've already set a precedent, so I don't think they would leave. I don't think they would do something with Portland and then not be willing to do something with other jurisdictions.
Also, it looked like, and I think that's what you're talking about, Heather, when you're talking about the state law. It looks like it's going to at some point hit state, or at least that's the idea behind it. And so possibly,
I can't predict what the
come on.
Come on, Beth, answer that one. Come on.
But
One can hope.
But here's my point is, I just don't feel like we have to wait for anything. It's already been passed in Portland. And maybe Boley doesn't want to become a contractor, but the reality is if it becomes an employment issue, it might end up on their plate anyway. And so possibly that's something that the baby steps. Maybe if Boley has enough people who are saying we want this to happen, they don't have a choice. So that's my thought, at least. I feel like asking Boley for permission to get the idea to pass an ordinance is backwards.
I think what I'm hearing is that we know sick leave is possible in Oregon. It's been done in Portland. We can proceed down that path, come up with generally what we want to do. I don't think that would be a waste of the next hour and a half. And then in the we hear back in a week, Boley says we don't want to deal with it. Then I guess we wasted an hour and a half. I don't think that's probably likely.
I would also, if you do want to look more closely at the health benefits issue, I would like to get an idea. Do you like the San Francisco ordinance? Is that the type of thing you're looking at, like a monetary amount, or would you also like to look at like the benefit piece, like offering the same benefits for part and full-time employees, or the sort of Chicago hybrid that I posed to you? So I guess maybe getting a sense from you, like which of those ideas you like, and then what we'll have to do is consult with an ERISA expert to see what their thoughts are on it, and that would have to happen sooner than later, to get your, okay, yes, we're interested in that, we want to get more research. So
I think knowing we can't do specifically healthcare, that I'd like to keep it broader. I mean, but there's a number of benefits. I mean, different types of benefits that could exist. I mean, and many employers may already be doing, they may already be allowing, a certain percentage, a certain amount of money towards, say, retirement or towards other types of benefits. They might have a cafeteria plan. So there's, some even allow you to put money towards daycare, that kind of thing. So I think would need to explore what options are available, because I believe that under the Affordable Care Act we can't specify health care.
So you want to look at all different kinds of benefits and whether you could even conceivably
Monetary amount towards that.
It sounds to me like we all agree that that's a road we'd like for you to explore.
Do you think a monetary amount as opposed to a percentage amount? Because if you do a monetary amount 10 years from now, it might not mean a whole lot. But if you do a percentage of the wage, then it'll grow with the cost of living.
But I think what we're hearing from the residents is that, from the citizens of Sherwood, that they're mostly concerned about those at the lower wage scale. And if we do a percentage, then it's by nature going to benefit those at the higher end more so than the lower end. Because if you have a percentage of $8.95 an hour versus a percentage of, $40 an hour.
I wonder, Heather, with just a little more direction, would that help? For instance, we talked about, Beth mentioned retirement. I also, I was thinking about what could we do about transportation, because I know that people are talking about traffic. Is there a way that we could look at a possible TriMet benefit, which I know I had when I worked in the city of Portland? A benefit towards
public transportation.
Yes, it is, but my
YMCA.
employer gave me a certain amount of money towards parking and towards my bus pass, which was outside of TriMet. So, I'm just wondering if we can give her a specific list of things we might want her to look at.
How many people are busing to Sherwood to work?
Well,
It's an honest question. I don't know.
and that is a fair question, but I think that, we are already partnering with Metro on a number of other issues, and so it would seem reasonable to me that an inquiry to Metro about options for, and TriMet options would be sensible.
I think that, while we're looking at the possibles, that's where we wouldn't have, I don't think we need to have every single possibility listed, but like saying in general, that a certain amount of money put towards, a cafeteria. Because I'm not sure we can be specific without
shared transportation, for example.
Right, without, again, stepping into potential legal issues related to, where we're preempted in the wage side, so.
Well, for now, if it's all right with everybody, let's take a 10-minute break. Is that okay?
My little microphone's always on.
Okay, thanks. In an effort to move forward, I think I'd just like to check in with Heather and make sure that you feel like you have enough direction from us to go back and review and then report back to us with possibilities.
I'm going to go and look. I'm going to have to get. Sorry, my microphone was broken before. It was just permanently on, and now it's off. Basically, we're going to have to just consult with an ERISA lawyer and basically get their opinion on the benefits issue. And I'll basically have them look at a number of different scenarios, what have you, with benefits. But that's what I and understanding that you want on the benefits question.
Correct.
Then you're also interested in doing a sort of ordinance that might impact scheduling that would look similar to provisions that you see in collective bargaining agreements. Is that
If that is a possibility for us to consider. Yes, is that?
Yeah, primarily. Primarily the scheduling issue, right?
Yeah,
Scheduling
scheduling.
of hours, I just suggested 2 weeks out. Were you guys in agreement with that?
Well, whatever the case may be, I'm not sure that we, at this point, need to define what it is.
Sure.
I think at this point, what we're looking for is, what are our possibilities?
So I think it would be beneficial to give her an idea of what it is you're all looking at, because possibilities could be endless. And ERISA lawyers charge $400 an hour. So are you looking at daycare, retirement plans, public transportation, YMCA, scheduling? What other ones in the realm of what you think would benefit putting an ordinance together to benefit the workers in Sherwood, which is, I think, is where
I'll
you're
open that up to the
going.
committee.
I think from the perspective what I've heard tonight, we'd be looking at, can we set a dollar amount per hour that must be, that an employer must designate towards benefits, and then keep it general regarding the type of benefits that they would offer,
Okay, so that's the ERISA question that Heather already has on her list.
and specifically not designate, under the ordinance, things such as, specific like daycare, healthcare, but can we designate that they must provide some amount per hour towards, I'm not sure if it's cafeteria plan, but is that even possible?
Okay. When we get to, let's talk about scheduling maybe when we get to the end, because I'm a little concerned about if you want to get together an ordinance that addresses these things. We'll need to get that specific information sooner rather than later. So I understand why you need this question answered first, but just as you think about scheduling, we'll need to come back to this fairly soon, because it will take, this is the longest ordinance and most complex ordinance by far to try to put together on anything. So we'll need plenty of time for the attorneys to be able to react to what specifics you might want to address.
Were you asking about the scheduling one? What we want to specifically address?
As far as scheduling to get this done
Okay.
by August
I misunderstood.
5th.
Speaking of scheduling, I think this is a great opportunity for us to talk about our meeting schedule and perhaps just review where we are, what Heather's office is working on. Just before the meeting, I had an opportunity to talk with Heather about their office reporting back to us on ordinances that we've already discussed. And she indicated that potentially, actually, I'm going to turn this over to you, and you can speak for yourself.
I did. I didn't want you all to hear me. I heard a little sound I made. We talked about getting you the, so you have a meeting on Thursday. And at the meeting on Thursday, you were going to talk about the 24-hour business regulations, security, those issues that you already identified. And then on Friday, we talked about our office getting you the two potential ordinances that we had talked about, which one would be the camping RV restriction ordinance. The other one would be the hazardous substance one. And the camping RV ordinance would also incorporate the nuisance violation, dilapidated vehicle issue that we talked about. It would be two ordinances. We would get them to you on Monday. And I believe that you all would probably like some time to review them before we really discuss them, the nitty-gritty of them. And you have a meeting scheduled for that evening, that Monday. So it wouldn't really give you a lot of time to look over them. So we just discussed, instead of having that meeting on Monday, having that meeting on Wednesday, July 24th.
Or potentially just leaving our meeting schedule as is for Thursday, the 25th, so that we have an opportunity to review
the drafted ordinances, mark them up individually, reconvene on Thursday, and that way we can have a really good, fluid conversation of potential changes or modifications that we'd like to see. So what I'd like to do is get your feedback as a committee if that works.
So can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
Heather, do you think you can have an answer on their benefits question by the 22nd?
Benefits question by the,
But next Monday.
to get the ordinance back?
Well, they have a question before they can proceed with the conversation we've been having tonight in regards to, wages or anything else. So
Just whether it's even an option.
Right.
Okay.
So,
So not an ordinance, but just,
right, because my thought is like I said, we need to get that done sooner rather than later. And if you don't have the other conversation on the 25th, you're just not going to get this done.
Right.
So my question to Heather is, do you think you can get that answer back to them on the 22nd, so maybe they can pick this conversation back up and figure out what specifics they might want to address in an ordinance?
so you would still meet on Monday? Or
No,
we
I-
would get you that
no.
information?
Yeah, I think that what Tom's saying
Just-
is we would still meet on Monday and continue the conversation about benefits. And then next Thursday's meeting would be about reviewing the specific ordinances about camping and hazardous materials.
Yes, I mean, hopefully, but it also is going to depend on whether we can, line up somebody that's going to be able to get back to us in that time schedule. So,
So we could leave it tentatively, and if we don't hear something back, we could cancel it then.
We could do that. The other option is to review on Thursday, once we've had all of the information distributed to us. And perhaps if in terms of correspondence, I mean, if that answer could even be emailed to us. I don't know if the reporting requirements or public notice, I don't know how that works. So if that would be acceptable, that would give us another opportunity to maybe come back with additional conversation points for our Thursday meeting.
We can submit email documents for your review. You just cannot discuss them as a group.
Yeah.
So you look at them, you mark them, you review them, and it just gives you material similar to our work session, just material to prepare for. You just cannot discuss them.
Do you mean this Thursday?
No, I mean the following.
25th.
Correct, the 25th. So this Thursday, we tentatively have discussing 24-hour business operations, limiting size of new business or buildings, those sorts of things. So what I'd like to suggest is that we cancel our Monday, the 22nd meeting, and have all of the information submitted to us via email by Monday, the 22nd, so that for our meeting on the 25th, we can come in very well prepared and ready to delve into comments and questions and modifications to what's been drafted.
Well, I have a suggestion. That would be to use Monday for something else, since we're so limited on our time. Do we have anything else on the agenda we could put on Monday, knowing that Thursday we'll discuss the other thing?
Well, and if we have an answer by Monday, then we could potentially we could continue working on the benefits issue.
because
So we may not know, be able to know, whether or not well, she won't know necessarily by Thursday.
Will you perhaps have an update for us on Thursday? Let's see, today's Monday.
That's a good point. Maybe we can make that decision on Thursday,
Okay.
based on what she should know. Heather should know by Thursday whether or not she can answer on Friday. So
Yeah.
if she doesn't have one by Friday, then yeah, it's not going to.
Okay, so we'll table that discussion. How does everyone feel about maybe opening up public comment? Anyone opposed or? Is that okay?
That would be great.
Okay.
I have a comment, if it's okay.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if it's legal what I'm going to, no, I'm just going to mention this thing. We had one of the business people who has not been louder, who has not been showing up, but we've had a businessman who's been showing up, and I think we're missing a little perspective from the business, and especially the larger businesses. Is there any way we could maybe replace her with somebody else, or does that have to go through resolution? There would have to be a resolution? Because I know we're walking one on tomorrow night.
You had a resolution initially, correct?
Yes, and it's clear that members have to be appointed by resolution. Well, I guess that's a good conversation piece. First off, I think that this committee is getting along really well and making good progress and doing good work. And, you know, we originally had 9, you're 7, but as the mayor is noting, 1 has been missing the entire time, has been on vacation. Certainly they could catch up by watching the videos. Those are up on YouTube. But that's a lot of YouTube video to watch, and I'm not sure where that's at. So the thought that kind of we've talked about was adding two members in one business and one citizen. But at this point, I'm not really sure that that's really, they're going to have to get up to speed as well. And so then there's a lot of people that are going to be way behind, and then that's going to slow things down. So one thought that I've had, and I've talked to the mayor and to council president about that, is to keep the 7 committee members this way rather than trying to add 2 new people on right now and wherever that ends up. And I think what the mayor is suggesting is, well, we have one member that hasn't been here was primarily here to represent the business community because she's in the chamber and she certainly has a lot of business contacts and can give information to that. And I think what the mayor is suggesting is we have someone in the audience who actually has been attending all the meetings, or at least the last 2 meetings, and maybe switching that out. So that's really not your choice, but I think is that correctly where you're going?
That was what I was looking at.
So it would have to be done by resolution. I have prepared a tentative draft walk-on resolution tomorrow night that would basically keep the committee at 7. And certainly I think that's really up to you and to the council president to decide, but I certainly think you would want to hear from your committee on that.
Right. It's just that I think we're missing possibly a perspective of a big business that would maybe add a little to the I mean, they may know more of some of the issues that go on in the big business that we're not hearing about, and they're positive feedback too, because he's asked a lot of questions. So.
And I would say, I mean, having someone here, I mean, I felt I missed a lot on Friday, not being able to, I was going to try to call and we weren't able to arrange that. So I think that having someone who's been in the audience at least would be very, very valuable. And I don't think that by not being, because we are extending a lot of time for public comment every meeting, that it wouldn't mean that Nancy wouldn't be able to still give input and bring that perspective to the table as well through public comment. So
I don't know how we can do it, but just throwing it out.
Well, it's a simple resolution that could be prepared by tomorrow night. That's not hard. And I think if any other committee members have input, that would be helpful. But ultimately,
It's going to be up to council tomorrow night.
it's going to be up to council tomorrow night, and specifically probably you and Linda to decide what you want to see on that resolution.
And there is one applicant, Robert Lake, who is from the corporate world and a business owner, and he might offer. He's very knowledgeable.
He didn't come in as a business, so we have to keep it certain. It has to be business.
Well, and that's another issue as well, is we don't have an application from what you're suggesting as well. And so, do we need to open up the application process again to be fair to everybody and to allow Mr. So.
My question would, I'm sorry.
No, please.
My question would be it's my understanding you had 18 applications,
That's correct. Yeah, we did.
and a few of them were late, and they got thrown out. And then you whittled that down. Were there alternates that, I thought, it was my understanding that there was alternates that we were going to kind of have on standby if people dropped out or something? And
That was not a part of the resolutions that
And
were
we
passed.
dropped, 2 dropped out.
If I might add a comment, I would agree actually with Beth's comment that we've had quite a few folks come to these meetings, and in reviewing citizen comments that we've already received, I would like to encourage you, Mayor Middleton, and Council President Henderson, to leave this committee as is. And we are certainly committed to hearing all public comment. And we will open up again tonight for public comment. And so what I want to assure you of is that Nancy and any other representative of big business or otherwise is more than welcome to testify and to bring their comments and suggestions for consideration.
Has anybody contacted her to see if she's going to show up in any of them?
Yeah, she's actually back in New England. She's been back in New England, had this trip planned for a year. So she'll be back for the Thursday meeting.
Right.
And she's indicated that she's going to watch the videos, which are online. We get them online within 24 hours. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Middleton. Go ahead.
But I know many of us would love to hear your input as well.
Absolutely. Please come on up, Mike.
You see enough of me at these meetings. It's been an interesting discussion today on the living wage and the benefits package. And as a business person, we actually have two businesses here, Pride Recycling, which offers a transfer station and recycling depot, and Pride Disposal. One of them's under 20 employees, the other one's at 60. So we actually fit both those kind of numbers. Under roof, we have over 50,000 square feet. That potentially could put us in a position of having, and we do have a few part-time people and a few people we don't pay benefits for. There's reasons for that. We have 3 couples that work for us, and under our medical plan, the spouse that's covered, or the employee that's covered, covers their family and their spouse with very good benefits. We pay the full premium on those. The spouse can opt out of having coverage because she's already, or he is already covered. And then we split the premium and give them extra money in their pocket. Would that qualify? I mean, I'm getting down the weeds, but this is issues that businesses are going to be affected by. We have part-time people in the depot. Some of them are retired that just want to work a day or two a week. They can't physically work more than that, and they just want some extra spending money. We can't afford to pay benefits, or even we pay minimum wage, but that's about it. And they're happy with that. That's what they want. We have high school kids or after school that want to work. That creates an issue, and most of those under the Health Care Act are going to be 26 and under are going to be covered anyway under the new health care plan, and that's part of, I know, the research that she's doing. You have, and if you have these, and I think if you're going to pass something that's going to require all businesses to provide these costs, you're going to have to make sure any businesses in Tualatin that comes into Sherwood is going to have to pay the same thing. You're going to have a financial impact to the businesses here, including, for example, let's take a donut shop. If they are forced to pay their part-time people because they're not open full-time, those kind of benefits, somebody's going to say, I can stop at the donut shop down the road and pay less because he's going to have to raise his prices. Those are cost impacts that are going to affect the rates. We obviously have garbage rates here, and those costs could impact your rates. So you're going to have to weigh those, the benefit, and I think that's what you mentioned, is the cost benefit, and that's very important. And thinking that businesses are going to absorb those costs, any business, whether it's a new tax, a fee, they're going to raise their price to cover it, or they're going to go out of business. I mean, that's just facts of life. So that's just kind of a summary, but I've got a lot more other examples, but I think that's kind of give you an idea that, and Rachel's kind of touched on some of them, that you're walking a real fine line. You're trying to make a better community, and I applaud that. This is a great community. We love doing business here. But you don't want to make it restrictive so that a business says, you know, I decided I'm going to move down the road 3 miles because I can have a different work environment, and that's important. And your charge isn't easy. It's and it's I you know, the mayor, appreciate he was not mentioning by name, but I've been here because I'm interested in the community, and I see this as a big fork in the road that the city's trying to make a decision which way to go, and it's been prompted by certain things that have been going on the last few years, and I'd hate to see Sherwood reach the goal that they're trying to get to, but make it so hard for anybody else to come in or live here. So I think I've spoken enough.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
So are you suggesting maybe we should cap it to, or focus on businesses that earn $1 billion or more because they won't be directly impacted?
I think when you start trying to target any particular type of business by commercial zone, residential or industrial zone, or size of business, you're really going to me, that's the same thing as doing the tax code, of giving one business a tax incentive over another one. I don't agree with that. They should just get rid of all loopholes together. But that's a political statement, and I'll forget that one. But I don't think you should target any size or any number of employees without doing all of them under the same umbrella. And because otherwise you're going to have businesses say, well, and you hear it now in the paper all the time, read it and hear it, that well, under these new healthcare laws, I'm just going to make sure I stay under this number of employees because I don't have to deal with all the regulations. We deal with those, and we have a full-time HR person that just deals with all the paperwork, and a smaller business is going to be really expensive on a per item or a per meal basis compared to, 10 or 15,000 customers that you spread out an extra dime per customer is not so bad, but when it's talking about 10 or 20 meals, that adds up pretty fast.
I think the issue is that with retail, if we focus on retailers, the cost is going on us, the taxpayer, to provide them benefits. So $6,000, I think, per person, per employee that doesn't get benefits is what we end up paying as state benefits or however they're getting benefits to pay for their healthcare costs. So though we're not targeting, if we're going to focus on we're talking about who's going to be saving money. Is it us who will be saving money, or is it going to be the employers who will be saving money?
Well, you talk about the impact for taxpayers, and I agree that there's a lot of issues with the tax code and all of that. But if that business is forced to pay that money and not get a tax benefit out of it, they're going to raise their prices, so everybody's going to pay some of that cost. One way or the other, that cost is going to be paid, and I'm not saying it's a right or wrong. It's just you're going to have to look at it's a balancing act, and when you raise this one goes down, or vice versa, and that's a tough charge.
Well, fortunately, the one retailer we are talking about promises to keep their prices low, so I think that this won't really be an issue.
So, well, and to clarify, we're not, as a committee, focusing on a particular retailer. So I'd like to make that clear.
I would agree. This is a lot bigger than the low price thing or whatever they call themselves.
So I do think that you bring up a good point about, where we're willing to pay, because I think when we're asking employers to have a certain standard, where is it easily passed on to the residents? Because we're the ones asking for these standards. Whereas maybe a manufacturer who's selling products outside more of Sherwood, whereas a retailer is selling products inside to primarily, local residents. So those costs may be be easily passed on to us. And I think we're the ones saying we're willing to pay for a higher standard through higher prices. If the cost is going to be transferred to a retailer or to a restaurant or to whoever it may be, so that maybe we do need to look at what types of businesses, because you do bring up a good point of, competitive environment. And we want to make sure that the businesses doing business in Sherwood are remaining competitive. So I think that at that point, we do need to consider again whether it is retail potentially that we're talking about.
And in our case, we're a unique situation. We operate in several jurisdictions. And the way the rates are set by each jurisdiction is they want their portion of our total cost, and they look at it and make sure they're justified and set a rate based on that with a fair profit margin. And then the owner salaries are capped on a certain amount and all those things. If we have a higher cost because we are located in Sherwood, that's going to affect our overall cost. So all the jurisdictions will see a little bit of a cost increase. And in Washington County and unincorporated, there's 12 different haulers that have their own area, but they throw all of us in the same mix and they average the costs out. that puts us at a little bit of a disadvantage. Not a lot, but a little bit. And I'm just using that as an example for other businesses that are located here, that a restaurant 2 miles down the road won't have those, and it might be just 10 cents for that extra pop or 15 cents for a cup of coffee. It's not a lot. These citizens here, if they vote for it, say, we will pay the extra here, but are you going to get outside people that are going to want to come down here? It's a great city, but I can have my coffee and donuts down the road for a little less. And that's real critical when the economy is the way it is. People are really careful how they shop when the economy is tough. So those are just issues. I'm not trying to discourage you from looking at making things better. It's just making sure you weigh everything so that when you finally come up with a resolution, it's going to give people a good chance to say, yeah, I like the balance. I want to go this way because I think it's more important on that. So,
Mike,
thanks.
just out of curiosity, how I realize that you are the type of business owner that knows that you have couples that work for you. But how are concerns with schedule in particular addressed? I mean, I know how we handle it, and I know how the restaurant industry handles it. And for the most part, I think it's important that I say that a lot of people in the restaurant industry work more than one job, and we have fluctuating schedules for the most primarily. So I'm curious because I'm wondering if you might have that, and how does your HR person handle it when someone comes to you and says, "Hey, I need Mondays off for X reason," when determining my schedule?
Usually each department has a supervisor, and when somebody in that department they'll go through and schedule vacations as far out as a year, so that we have them. But there's always somebody comes in and says, "Hey, I didn't know next Monday I got to take off because my son's got a dentist appointment, or my daughter fell down, broke her arm, and she's going to have to be home for a few days." We work around those as much as possible, even with just a 24-hour notice, as long as it doesn't create an issue for the rest of the employees. We carry a little extra staff in each department just for those things, because you have so many people gone, so many weeks a year you got to cover anyway. But it can get, there's times when we're a little short, and it puts overtime on us. But scheduling is, the employees know where they're supposed to be on a weekly basis, but we don't go out too much farther other than vacation schedules.
Okay, and then if I may make a comment about, I appreciate what you're saying, and I primarily appreciate what you're saying because I think that some of these are mom and pop shops that people have said will not be affected by this and who we're not trying to target. It's very difficult when we start enacting ordinances that apply, and I think this is what you're saying, to one business inside of town as opposed to another business that's right outside of town. And when we're discussing these businesses, I'm not going to be on a pedestal, but when we're discussing these businesses, it's important that I feel like we're sort of getting into this realm of, well, these are the bad guys and the businesses that do things the way we don't want them to, and then these are the good guys. And that concerns me a lot because I know when I'm doing business, I know who those other businesses are full well that are not doing the same things that I'm doing, that I believe are ethically and correct. And it might cost me some money. But I also know that they're acting within the law and within their rights. And I think it's very difficult for me to hear things like, "We're willing to pay," because I know that there are people in Sherwood who are not willing to pay. I do business here, and people tell me what they're not willing to pay. And I think that's what you're saying to me, is there's a certain threshold where that money is not going to come from their profit line. It's going to come from our pockets when we buy that product. And so, for instance, if my all-natural pork that I buy locally raises its price of bacon, I'm going to ask you to pay that price of bacon increase. I'm not going to take the hit. And neither is any other business, I believe. So I think that what Mike is saying is he falls into both those categories, and you can raise your prices, but that will make people not do business with you. Am I correct?
It will affect other jurisdictions also, so you'll have the reverse effect. But I think you're right on, it's got to be a balance so that anybody that does business here or potentially outside of town is going to be balanced so that customers will choose on the quality of service and their choice rather than just sheer price. That's a big issue, I think, is trying to, and your charge is difficult. I don't relish that. And, I didn't apply to the group because I've been here because I'm interested in what's going on, but that's a tough job. So, and I have enough headaches.
I have a question for you. I appreciate your perspective, and I really appreciate your being here. My question to you would be, do you have any suggestions for our thresholds that maybe that we haven't looked at? That, I mean, you fresh face, you've been sitting here for 2 weeks. Do you have any direction you could give us to that might be able to narrow this down and still be fair to as many businesses as possible in Sherwood without singling somebody out?
That's a tough one because you're going to have to find something that affects all the businesses equally, and I don't know if you can do that. You may get close to it, and that may be acceptable. But it's really tough because you're going to have to figure some way to affect businesses outside the city to make it fair for those that are in. Some businesses, yeah, it's the right thing. I spend a little extra for non-chemical food, for example, or our hydraulic fluid that we use is vegetable oil based. It's not petroleum based, so that if we do have a leak, it's cleaned up, but there's no issues with the environment. Those are little extra things. We recycle our antifreeze and all the other items that instead of just letting somebody have them. So there's cost to do that, and that's a business choice. But at some point, you get to a business choice of in business or out of business, and it's hard for me to answer that question because I don't know if there is a perfect answer. I think if you can get to an 85 or 90% or better comfort level, then you're there. But it's dealing with those that are just across the border to the next city or an unincorporated that might just have a little bit of advantage. And being the first one on the block, that is something you have to face, and the citizens may decide to go there and accept that. And there may be a bump in the road, and hopefully it's a small bump and not a major one until the others come along. You know, you talk about Portland doing some of these things at the big city and a lot of businesses. They may drift out, and the other jurisdictions may say, yeah, it makes sense. Now we got the on board, counties may come on. So then it's, you see that with the sales tax not in Washington and not in Oregon, and all the fighting over who goes across the river to buy in Oregon, but they don't have income tax in Washington. So, I mean, it's the same type of thing. It's not a balance, but they're close. I mean, you pay the same in taxes, but it's just in which pocket you take it out of. So I'm rambling. Sorry, I need to get off here.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to? Yeah, come on up.
Okay, when the economy is good, it's a buyer's market. Houses are based on, mortgages are based on, the economy gets better, things go up, people can afford more. When the economy is poor, we all know cheap is good. And we can all agree on that, probably. Heather, I want to talk to you. I was so happy that you brought in some extra examples that you brought in. You brought in Santa Fe. I've been there, spent many, many days there. Santa Fe's economy is based on New Mexico. It's based on tourists, and that is its primary base. Artists live there. Artists do business there. So it's a different economy than Sherwood. We hope that Sherwood turns into that, correct, Matt? Vacation spot of the world?
Nancy, if you would please direct your comments to the committee.
I'm very sorry.
Thank you.
Anyway, I was very proud that you also brought in, San Francisco as the other example, because I've been to San Francisco. And they're a wonderful mix. They have both vacation and everyday economy. People living there, people doing business there, people riding BART, people getting back and forth. So I was very, very happy that you brought that up. And I do think that if all of this goes together, we will have one heck of a bill, or one heck of a example for the rest of the small communities in this entire world to look at in many ways. One other thing, we took on the water issue. It's a utility issue, and somehow we now are getting billed. I get one every month instead of every other month like I used to when I first moved here. And correct me if I'm wrong, but we're cleaning up the Willamette. Correct? I'm just asking. We're cleaning up the Willamette.
That's not something I think that we can speak to.
Well, somebody in this room probably can. I mean, that was the issue when we first started talking about the water issue, is will we be cleaning up the Willamette? And the answer was yes, we'll be taking the water out of the Willamette instead of out of Bull Run.
I don't recall this committee having a conversation about.
Oh, I mean this committee, I
water
mean
in
the
Willamette.
city of Sherwood. They took this on as an issue.
That may be a question for the city council,
Okay.
the city council meeting.
Anyway, we took that on. We figured out as a city how to bill for it. I get a bill every month. I get fees. I don't think this city is beyond being able to tackle this issue. That was it.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to? Yeah, come on up.
One of the things that I'm a little concerned about, are we, instead of worrying about one business, should we not be worried about attracting the businesses that we think will, or that we know will provide these better paying jobs and benefits? And because whenever you force people to do something, you usually don't end up with the best thing. Also, do we need to encourage workers to go out and find better jobs instead of working at low paying, or where they don't have the incentive to earn what they want? It's like you're taking from one what is perceived to be a rich person and giving it to a poorer person. When you do that, you take some incentive away from the richer person sometimes, who, if they have more money, they create more businesses, which makes it better for everyone. The opportunity is there, but you have to be willing to step up, work for it, and earn it. But my main question is that how will this, if you pass this, will it keep other bigger businesses away who maybe can pay better wages than what you perceive? So I think we need to look at more carefully what is keeping businesses out of town. The ones that we want to come, we don't seem to be able to attract them. Part of the problem, and this current project is probably not going to help very much, but is traffic. It seems like we should be more concerned with traffic than we are about benefits for employees. Because if you look at Tualatin now, how, it takes so long to get there. Businesses are not going to want to really look at this, any good-sized business, to come out here, because transportation is going to be such a big headache. So they're going to try to locate. So are we really attacking the problems that are really keeping this town down so it isn't growing? The other thing is on the RV. I'm not sure, but I know, like what happens with the Elks Lodge, they have an RV park there. So is this ordinance going to affect them? And the other question is, I believe they're permitted by the Washington County. So does Washington County have an ordinance that regulates RVs?
I can speak to that. On our meeting on Friday, the Elks came up and we discussed, I believe, as a committee, trying to carve out an exemption for them.
I can probably add to that a little bit. I spoke to an elk last night and asked him about, as my understanding, they are grandfathered in on a conditional use permit for their RV park. Their RVs are not hooked up to a septic system. They have to be fully self-contained. If they ever sell that property or decide to expand or improve their RV park, they will have to go through the zoning commission for improvements. Isn't that correct, Tom?
It will depend. They could still be non-conforming, but certainly if they try to expand or change the RV component, they would. Yeah. So it depends on what they do on their side and how they do it. But if they were to try to move it or enlarge it or anything changing what they have there, then yes, they would have to come before the planning commission in order to do that. But if they leave it exactly the same way it is, they can certainly make other changes and not have to come before the planning commission on the RVs. They would have to on the other components.
And any ordinance that, like we discussed the other night, I think we left out the term actual RV, and we limited at least the parking. We haven't really discussed the overnight or the 24-hour operation, but the parking is for any vehicle, and cooking and sleeping or anything. Doesn't matter what kind of vehicle they're in. And I think they're still writing that up.
Yeah, we anticipate that Heather's office should hopefully have a draft ordinance before us by next week for review. So definitely keep your eyes out for the next agendas. We'd love to hear from you at that point as well.
But just to reiterate, I think my main concern is the fact that are we creating something that will keep people out of businesses, out of Sherwood, instead of bringing them in? And I think that's a very delicate balance. And one of the things is that we are overly balanced with residential at this point, and you need the balance because businesses do pay more than residents. Cost more for the city for a residential, especially with schools, than it does for a business. Thank you.
Thanks. I'd like to address a couple of points, if that's okay. As I listened to your last testimony, and as I hear what you're saying tonight, I would personally agree with you that we have a lot of room for improvement within Sherwood. And I feel that the economic improvement strategy that was completed some years ago, back in 2006, addressed many, if not all, of the points that you've brought before us, and then some. And since that time, the city of Sherwood has made numerous improvements. But I would agree. I don't think that we're done, and I think that my understanding is there are other committees working on the marketability of Sherwood and improving the mix of businesses coming into our area. I think that you missed a couple of my comments earlier, but it does appear, based on the numbers that were presented in 2006, that 85% of folks that live here are working outside of Sherwood. And we did talk with Tom about perhaps supplemental to the work that we do here, making some recommendations to the Planning Commission and Council about a re-review of our economic development strategy, and maybe making some recommendations that they could consider in future decisions for Sherwood. So I think the points that you raised are really important.
One question I missed, and I'm sorry, but how are you going to count number of employees?
We haven't got to that yet. That's a great question, though. I mean, that's something I've thought about in reading the way some of the other jurisdictions that I've read have done it, and it's not as simple as it sounds.
Because, I mean, what happens to somebody owns 3 McDonald's, then do they all of a sudden, instead of having 20 employees, got 60?
The devil's in the details.
Yep.
Real quickly to add, you can step away. I was just going to comment on your concerns about traffic. Nancy at the first meeting had challenged us all to go read the citizen comments in the City Hall, and I did. And I tallied them by category, and I shared this a little bit at the last meeting, but I know many of you weren't here. And by far and away, the number one citizen concern was traffic. Unfortunately, under the scope of this committee, there's really nothing we can do that I'm aware to address traffic concerns. That's obviously, the city, the county. But I think we'd all agree that traffic is a concern, and we'd love to see a better, more improvements. And I know they're making some on Walton Sherwood Road in this coming year. So.
Does anyone else have anything? Would you like to come up?
Yeah, just one comment. Tony Bevel, I live in Sherwood. We're all here, whether we admit it or not, because of Walmart, okay? So that's different. We'd have to admit that. But I suggest that, we're trying to shape the future of Sherwood, and there's one important component, as Mayor Middleton mentioned, the Chamber of Commerce isn't here. I think they really need to be addressed. They need to give answers. What, again, as Eugene said, what are we doing to attract businesses to Sherwood? What is there here? What do we have to offer? What can we offer? And I guess that's what you guys are trying to decide in a way. So that's all I have to say. And I'm getting the feeling that, all these ordinances that you're looking at, when it comes down to the nitty-gritty, you're going to be offering charters that when someone, applies for business in Sherwood, they're going to say, hey, this is what is a member, this is a integral part of Sherwood. This is what you can offer to Sherwood, and what we can offer you is good business. So, you may be looking at a plan B.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the public this evening? Okay. Just make sure. Did you have something else to add? Did you have something else to add? No? Okay. With that, I'd like to maybe just offer an opportunity for committee comments on anything that's been discussed this evening. Tom, did you want to say something?
I'll give you guys an opportunity first. But I would like a few minutes just to wrap a few things up.
Sure.
So.
I'm wondering if we can focus on sick days. Maybe you're talking about that portion of the benefits.
I was under the impression that at this point we're going to be waiting for Heather's office to get back to us.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't think we needed to wait. We know sick days are allowable in Oregon, or sick leave policy like Portland is allowable. I thought what we're waiting to hear back from was specifically some sort of benefits package, some sort of, as I think Beth said best, some sort of, minimum amount that can be applied broadly to benefits in general. But we can certainly we know we can do a sick leave policy if that's what people want to do.
Yeah, and I'd like to suggest 5 days a year.
I would suggest accrued.
Okay, well.
And accrued is what Portland is doing. So I can give a little briefing on. So Portland's policy, as it was passed by Portland City Council, it allows for up to 5 days accrued per, on a 1 hour for every 30 hours worked basis for every employer with more than 5 employees. So it'll be 6 employees and above. So if we decided we wanted to go that route, that's the standard that was set in Portland.
Did you say 6 or 60?
6.
Beth, I understood it as all employees accrue sick leave, and 6 and above is paid.
Correct. You are correct. That 5 and under accrues unpaid. Correct.
Right.
You are correct.
So is that something that we'd like to explore?
Sure.
Or go ahead. All right, okay. Given that we've identified this is a core issue, perhaps at this point, I feel like we can take a vote, or I can open up the floor for someone to make a motion that this language is included as a portion of an ordinance with the work that we're doing.
I wouldn't think you need a vote at
No.
this point in time, just an indication by you that that's what you want to come back to you.
Okay.
With text regarding that would be sufficient.
Okay.
I'd be interested in more specific language and discussion about 5 days. Can you go over the full-time, part-time thing?
Would you
again?
like to, I mean, we could possibly just ask that we bring the City of Portland ordinance? Yeah. And so the accrual basis is that, so let's say you have somebody who's working, I mean, they would accrue again up to 40 hours essentially if they were working a full-time schedule. If they were working a part-time schedule, then it would be fewer days and fewer hours that they would accrue. So it's on a, so it's someone who's working a part-time job isn't going to necessarily accrue 5 full days because they'd be on an accrual basis versus one that's, set 5 days per year, regardless of the number of hours worked.
I understand that part. I would be cognizant of the residents and the peoples in the audience of limiting the desire for businesses to come into the Sherwood area. I think we still need to be attractive city, and I don't know if we want to.
This is quite low. I mean, 5 days a year, it's not high.
Well, I'd certainly be interested to know, and maybe Rachel, you can speak to this for your business, but also other businesses in town that are in the 6 to 20 employee range to be curious about what the potential impact of something like that would be on their business. And to the point made a little bit ago about, Portland's a big city. A certain number of businesses are going to do business there and have to do business there no matter what. If Sherwood enacts an ordinance like this and we want to attract in new businesses and a new business is looking at us versus Tualatin versus Wilsonville versus Newburgh versus Beaverton Shoals area, Tigard, I guess I missed Tigard, King City. That's a potential determining factor, right? Okay, if we go to Sherwood, we have to guarantee a certain amount of sick pay per year. We can locate in one of these other towns 5 miles away, and we don't. And this may be a business in the future that we want to have come here, not one that maybe some of us don't. And I think that's something I'm really concerned about and driving away business that we may want to have in this town.
So San Francisco passed earned sick days policy a number of years ago, and what they have found is actually that it hasn't had that impact. That it's been, they've gone back and surveyed employers who had concerns prior to the passage. And in fact, they have said, no, actually wasn't really that big deal. As Naomi said, actually, that if you calculate the cost, it's actually not that high. And even already, it hasn't even been enacted in Portland yet. And many businesses are saying, actually, this is not going to be that big a deal.
What's the population of San Francisco and Portland? We're talking about 500,000 people, and then if you could throw in the metro area, of San Francisco, it's even bigger. And they don't. You can locate. You can't leave the heart of San Francisco and go outside of town where the ordinance doesn't carry and still expect to pull in any of the same amount of business. You're talking about an hour out of town. Here, it's 3 miles down the road. So business can choose easily to locate outside of Sherwood to avoid this hit. We're not a 500,000 person town.
But we're slowly, and I'm sure we're all aware of it, becoming part of Metro as much as we don't want to be, and we want to be Sherwood, the small town. So I think that it is maybe a concern, but not as much as it would be if we were out in rural Oregon or, hundreds of.
Actually, it'd be less of a concern in rural Oregon because businesses don't have anywhere else to go, right? If the next town is 30 miles away, the business isn't going to pull up stakes and leave town because of sick leave policy. If the next town here is 3 miles away, how easy is it for a business to say, you know what, I'm going to move down the road to Tualatin, or I'm not going to come here at all. I'll locate in Tualatin to begin with.
But we have the benefit.
Tualatin already has, sorry to interrupt, Tualatin already has a big geographical advantage in the fact that they're on the freeway in some degrees. That's a disadvantage in other ways, and that's one of the reasons I live here. But from a business standpoint, that's a pretty significant disadvantage we already have, and we'd just be potentially exacerbating that.
Well, anything we do here could be looked at that way or as a positive thing. So what I mean is we have the benefit of being part of this metro area, and that people also know that, and there are numbers. There's population, and there are people that come to Sherwood specifically for what we offer, although it is in close proximity to Portland. And the same could be true for any business that chooses to operate here or not.
And I will say your concerns were expressed in Portland, and again, the fact that so many low-wage workers currently earn a single day of sick leave, and the public health impacts that it has on the community, that all those things were taken into account, and the ordinance still passed. And it was, because they had many of those same conversations, like, why couldn't they just locate just outside the border? Why not? And cities that have passed it have found actually it's been very much a community-wide benefit, and, there are campaigns nationally where, they've just passed it in New York City. I mean, it's...
Right, and all of these places are large cities.
And
so, we're still talking about 500,000 versus 18,000. It's impractical for a business to leave the heart of Portland and locate outside of town to avoid a sick leave policy. The cost-benefit analysis is easy. You're better off to pay more for the sick leave policy and stay where you're going to do more business. Here, that equation is out the window.
Doug, would you agree that creating this kind of an ordinance could potentially be viewed as promoting community well-being and promoting a conscious advance of employees within Sherwood?
It could be, or it could keep businesses from locating here.
I think part of this conversation should be we should ask employers here what they already do provide, because I bet a lot of them already do provide sick days. So I'm curious. And 5 sick days is not.
I'd like to hear from Rachel. Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot. You can refuse to talk.
The nature of our business, and this was actually a big. The Portland law doesn't take effect until January 1st, 2014. First, I need to say. So no business in Portland is actually doing this because they have to if they're doing it now. So we don't know what the impact is on those businesses until January 1st, 2014. Secondly, I can only speak to the restaurant business, which is already part-time, rotating schedule, more than multiple job employees for the most part. So it's difficult for me to discuss something that might impact a company the size of Mike's or a large retailer. I do know that the Portland law affects 240 hours worked per year. So it's an employee who works 240 hours a year. You accrue your sick leave, and it is not paid unless you have 6 or more. As a company, as a business model for restaurants, this was really, really discussed a lot because restaurants do this the most. We don't offer paid sick time because you can say, hey, Joe, can you work my shift today? I'm not well. And Joe can come work your shift. But we also are in the unique position of, and I don't mean to demean or devalue an employee who sits in a chair in an office. But if my employee does not come to serve food or cook food, I cannot be open. Also, alternatively, if my employee comes to work sick, I cannot be open by law. So that's clear as day. So I have to follow this rule already. However, if you ask me to accrue sick leave, am I then allowing vacation time and unplanned absences? This 5 days of an unplanned absence of an employee once a year I could close for 5 days, potentially. This could impact a small business really a lot. And if you have one person who can only do one job, and that person is out, and they're not necessarily sick, but they have accrued this time, it could be an impact. If I have to pay sick leave, what then happens to tipped wages? How do I figure that into the pay? These are just discussions that I've heard and things that I've discussed with the other person who owns the business with me, who happens to be my husband. But, what do we do then? Do we factor in the wages that they may have made by tips?
Just real quick, the Portland law did not. It was base rate only.
It did not. It also has really a lot of exemptions. A lot of businesses that are exempted, and those businesses had more money and more time to lobby. I will say that I feel like it's a great policy. I think as an employer, I'm already doing it. I think Mike's already doing it. It's like I said earlier, I think employers who want to have healthy workplace are already doing it. So if it's a concern, it's not going to address those people who are working 240 hours a year or less, less than 240 hours a year. So I think we need to consider that. Who is it going to impact? Is it going to impact who we really want it to impact? And secondly, this is another one to discuss the level, the threshold, because for a small business, this could be huge. For a larger business, Mike's already said he's got some extra people kind of around. Probably they're the people that we call double hat wearers. I can cook and I can wait tables. My husband can't cook, but he can wait tables. Most companies kind of have that built in, but not all do. So you asked for my input, there it is. I think it's
so
a
you're
great
saying
law.
You do provide sick days?
No, we do not accrue sick leave on the books. Nope. Okay. But if you're sick, you can't come to work. It's the law. It's the law for me.
And you engage in a lot of shift trading then, is what I heard you say. And,
yeah,
and that's common
absolutely.
in your industry, from what I understand.
Absolutely, yes.
And that to me, brings in the other idea of the scheduling in advance. Because if you have an ordinance that requires scheduling in advance, and you also allow shift trading, then the business is all of a sudden potentially going to be in a situation where they publish a schedule, people trade shifts, and then someone comes back 2 months later and says, hey, I ended up working these extra days that weren't on the schedule and now they file a complaint, right? So either you're going to have to put yourself at risk of being found guilty of a complaint because someone traded outside the published schedule, or you're going to have to require some sort of process whereby people do their shift trading through you, so you have it documented, so if somebody does come back later, you can prove that the scheduling exception was
Yes, I see your point. However, it's already kind of built. That's already kind of built in. It's scheduled shifts per week. So most of the time, when reading most of the employment laws, it'll say, this person is scheduled for 20 hours a week, and it's all averaged, Doug. So for the most part, if I'm picking up 3 extra shifts in 1 week, but on average I still work this many hours, that doesn't really impact.
Yeah, so it depends on how we write that. If we write an ordinance about publishing a schedule 2 weeks in advance, it depends on how we write that.
But if it's in line with already with BOLI wage and hour laws, that won't happen.
Okay.
So as long as we sort of stay within that realm, it won't happen. But that also lends to, if you have someone who you're repeatedly asked to work extra hours, they need to have the ability to say to someone, I am working 33 hours all of the time. So that needs to also be built in. But the reality is this is a threshold issue, I think, because Portland's is pretty low.
Would you be willing to talk to us about this, Mike? Sick days specifically? No.
Thank you for considering that. Oh, thanks, Mike. At this point, I think we're going to do closing comments. Did you have something to add? I saw that you reached for the button. Okay. I appreciate this is great dialogue. And I think these are, again, we've said this time and time again, but what a great opportunity we have to think through these issues and have feedback from Sherwood residents and others. And this is, as someone said, a huge charge. And, I'd like to believe that we will make every effort at meeting a reasonable ordinance that will really better define what it is that we are looking for in terms of businesses that reside here in Sherwood, and to do better by the folks that are working here as well. At this point, Heather, it sounds like one of the requests that we've had that you do look at building this into the ordinance that
I would probably just bring back the Portland sick leave law.
Yeah.
And just if there are some provisions that aren't appropriate for Sherwood, I might highlight them. But
generally it sounds like we've got consensus that this is something for us that we'd consider this.
Well, and I'm not sure I'm hearing consensus yet.
Well,
just to be clear, I'm not unwilling to consider it. I have concerns, especially about the threshold, most likely, but I have concerns in general about applying it to our city.
And I will just be clear that I would want us to stick to the Portland thresholds at this point. I wouldn't be able to support anything that varied from that currently.
Mm-hmm.
Did you?
Yeah, I have concerns, but as sitting here, you said something that clicked with me. Is I'm not here for my concerns. I'm here for like the citizens of Sherwood, and we are just making recommendations that we're going to send to the voters. So it's not like I'm going to have the deciding voice, even though I may not agree with Portland's idea of what things should go like. I'm certainly not against sending it to voters or sending it to the city council with recommendations, but I would like to look at those exemptions. And
I think that's a great point. I think it was Eugene that questioned what it was that we were doing here, really. And at the end of the day, Eugene, and to everyone else, we are working as a committee to draft ordinances that will be recommended to City Council for their consideration, that would then be placed on a ballot for the vote of the people. And that's what we're doing. So at the end of the day, it's not our decision. It's yours. Tom, did you want to add any comments?
So I guess what I'm hearing is that you would like us to start an ordinance that essentially has a lot of the elements inside of the Portland's ordinance, and to bring back language you can start to take a look at. You may add other components to that ordinance based off of what Heather's research comes back to show, or you may decide to put that into a separate ordinance, because you could end up putting too much chicken soup into one ordinance and then the whole thing failing at the public because certain people don't like certain components, and so they're not going to vote for it for one reason or another. So I guess those are things that you'll need to consider as you move forward, but I would still caution you, there's only a certain amount of ordinances that you guys are going to be able to handle given the deadlines that you have. Just another thing, I was listening really carefully to kind of the things, and I think this is a great conversation, and the sick leave bill, I think, accomplishes a lot of the things that I heard from the public and from you guys as well, as what you guys want to accomplish and what the mission is, and that's to make things better. I mean, I heard that over and over, and the areas that I heard, how can you make things better is, do things that, might be great for Sherwood, but might also encourage other jurisdictions to consider. I mean, that's what Portland did with the sick leave bill. They didn't do it just because they did it mostly because of they're Portland and they wanted that, but they were also trying to encourage the state to do something, and the state certainly considered sick leave seriously during the last legislative session.
And there's a work group currently during the interim as well.
Yeah. So, so that's one good thing, to help make things better, because, Naomi brought up the point about, the socioeconomic issues that, you can deal with. If you can take people off of state programs or other programs where they're on, well, then that's better for everybody else. But if it's just Sherwood, then really we're still paying our taxes, and then we're paying an extra fee for something, and maybe that's perfectly okay. But if you can write something that's good enough that other jurisdictions want to follow, the example, then you can make a change, not only in Sherwood, but you can make a change on a bigger scale, which would be good. And then the third thing was, empowering people to have a better something, whether, Gene brought up training and education, but maybe it's, just making a better decision about not coming to work when they're sick, that's good for them. That's good for a lot of different things. So, those are the kind of the things you might want to think about, those three things as you consider these, are we hitting these targets as you move things through the process? Because I heard that from a number of different people and you as well. So I kind of want to just lay those three things out there as kind of things that you consider as you consider other things. Can you hit these three litmus tests in order kind of to say, so that you're doing what you want, you're making things better, which is what the goal is.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think Doug had a couple more comments.
Yeah, so I just wanted to follow up on the conversation from tonight. So this was mentioned by one of the citizens, and I just want to be clear that I'm not here about Walmart. I know this committee may have been originally formed because of pressure about Walmart. I'm not here to target Walmart. I'm not here to benefit Walmart. I'm here to look at what kind of ordinances we can enact that's going to be better for this town tomorrow, next week, next year, 10 years down the road. So I just want to cover that. I mentioned this earlier, and our economic principles are based on the free marketplace, and I believe in that. And we have some significant geographical challenges in Sherwood already, right, that some of our neighbors don't have. Transportation challenges and infrastructure challenges and locational challenges, right? We're not on I-5 like Wilsonville and Tualatin are. Tigard's closer to the metro area, lots of more ways in and out. Newburgh's a little bit further down the road, outside of the metro, council area. And so we already have a traffic issue. We all know that. We also have an old town that we're trying to revitalize, and that is fantastic, but it's not on the main road through town. That's another challenge we have to face. So, I'm really concerned about making Sherwood more uncompetitive compared to neighboring towns than we already are in a lot of ways. And I want to bring business. I want to bring the right kind of business into Sherwood. I'd love it if we could bring in a bunch of office parks that had professionals making $50,000, $100,000 a year in them. That's going to be really hard given our locational challenges and the transportational challenges. So I love the idea of making Sherwood a great, vibrant place to live. That's why I live here, and to work. And I wish and hope there are some ways we can encourage the businesses we all want to see here to be here. But I have to caution us against really becoming uncompetitive in the business marketplace. So thank you.
Anyone else?
I think it might be good to discuss what are the great things about Sherwood, what things would draw business. For example, I myself think of Sherwood as a gateway to the wine country, and so that could be a whole huge marketing point.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And I think, again, I think that topic is probably better suited in an economic development kind of a committee. And while I think it's really, really important, I'm not sure this committee can focus on those items other than as those things pertain to the ordinances that we're working to craft.
Right. I'm just in response to what Doug was saying.
Mm-hmm.
There are some limiting factors to Sherwood, but certainly not. I think a lot of people choose Sherwood specifically for what it does have to offer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're trying to retain as well. And all those petitions that people signed, a lot of them said, I moved to Sherwood because, and they listed their reasons. So for us to at least, take what they said and to paraphrase it and to talk about it would be part of this whole discussion, I think.
Okay.
So you guys might have more, but I wanted to touch on a couple things that I mentioned because I've heard them a number of times, and I think they deserve to be kind of addressed. So I'll start with the economic development strategy and economic development in general. We've had a conversation going on in regards to what we've done there and what we plan to do. The economic development strategy was adopted in 2006. It was a joint effort that included consultants, the planning department, planning commission, and council. It was a good plan and had a lot of information, and there were some things missing in it, but for the most part it was a good plan. But it didn't really, while a lot of things in there have got implemented, it was kind of a project that kind of went on the shelf and wasn't talked about, and this is all stuff we've talked about. So we've picked that up in the SERPAC committee, which is the Sherwood Urban Renewal Policy and Advisory Committee. So while it sounds like SERPAC is mission is limited to urban renewal, council back in 2005, I believe, added economic development to their plate. So that is something that we have talked with SERPAC about. We've actually gone through the economic development strategy with them. We've also given a presentation to the city council in regards to that, and city council has pretty much indicated that they would really like to see more information that would empower SERPAC to really start taking the economic development strategy more seriously and making sure that the components in there are actually working. some things that have come up, that are in the study is, this mix between jobs and housing. And the strategy identified a certain low, medium, and high jobs that they would like to accomplish over a 20-year time frame. And with the Tonkin employment area, the amount of jobs that are identified in that area will exceed the high ratio of what they wanted for employment in the area. So that's an important area for us to continue to focus on, because that is what was desired in the study and in the community, to kind of change that ratio of housing to jobs imbalance. At the same time, limiting the amount of housing that comes in is the other part of that, because if you just let people build everywhere, everybody wants, loves Sherwood, and a lot of people want to be here, and obviously the market doesn't support that right now, but probably would in the future. So there's got to be a balance there on the housing side as well. Retail was a small component of that study, and certainly with the retail coming in and other things, we're probably getting close to where that study was suggesting that we would be. So it kind of balanced all three of those things. It also touched a lot on tourism, and we also have had a conversation with the Urban Renewal Board about tourism, and that is going to continue. There were 4 areas that were identified in the tourism. One is the Tuolumne National Wildlife Refuge. One was a gateway to the wine country that Naomi just mentioned. Another was a hotel-motel initiative. And the fourth one was sports complex and Sports Town USA. And again, that's something that SERPAC is going to be working on. So I guess what I'm trying to say is 2 things. First off, there is a committee that's looking into these and is interested in and will continue to do that. And so if anybody wants to join the committee, we have a couple of vacancies. I know we have an application in, which we got the last couple of days from someone who's sitting in front of me. Doug actually applied for SERPAC. So, but we do have another vacancy, and it's actually a really interesting committee that's kind of shifting its focus out of urban renewal onto more of the economic development topics as we move forward. So certainly it hasn't been lost on the city, and it's happening. It's just happening in a different venue from this committee. The other thing I'd like to kind of touch on is traffic, because that's been brought up a number of times as well. And I'm not going to get into all the different things on traffic, but I do want to kind of list off the improvements and give you kind of a general idea, because I think everybody probably on this committee and maybe in Sherwood can agree that traffic is a problem. I think that's a universal thing that pretty much everybody in Sherwood can agree on. But there are a number of things going on, and specifically some things going on in the very near future. So the Tuolumne Sherwood Road improvements, that's about a $10 million project that Washington County is doing, and that's going to carry additional lanes all the way through to Borchers as you're coming up Tuolumne Sherwood towards 99W, where the backup towards Tuolumne goes. They're planning to carry an additional lane all the way through to Borchers on the other side. They're also planning to eliminate a signal, if at all possible, at the theater and where Albertsons is, and provide alternative access to those businesses. Additional lanes, additional turn lanes, additional queuing links, different staging, which will then allow more efficient operations at the intersection of 99 and 12, I'm sure, which is a real problem. Their models show that they're going to probably be solving the problem at that intersection for anywhere from 15 to 20 years. So what that means, I'll let everybody decide, but I guess I don't want to leave people thinking, yes, we all know it's bad today. And I guess, if you take a look at what people are planning, things are going to get better in the future. Along with that is, the Adams North project that will get extended all the way through from Tuolumne, Sherwood, around to the Home Depot signal. Washington County is also working on an extension of 124th, which will go south all the way down to Tonquin Road, and then from Tonquin over to Graham's Ferry, which will then provide a freight route to serve all the Tonquin employment area and everything in that other area, and it'll provide another access to I-5. And then, they're also doing an intelligent transportation system project on Tuolumne Sherwood, where they're going to link all the signals together so that they communicate with each other better and can get a better workflow. And they're working with the state to coordinate the county signals with this signal that the state has at the intersection of 99W and Tualatin, Sherwood, and Roy Rogers. So those are all projects that are working that will definitely make the situation better. And then in the larger time frame, we're still hoping to get a southern arterial from I-5 over to 124th or Tonquin, and I know that was a long project, but it's still something that's out there, and it's still something that we're trying to pursue, and in more of a 20 to 30 year time frame. But those are all projects that will make things better. So I'll let everybody decide what that means for them for traffic, but I definitely think that it's been something that's been identified and something that is being worked on currently.
Is there any discussion of a re-review of the capacity allocation program?
I don't. It was certainly a part of the town center thing that I think kind of got dropped. I'm not sure whether that is in the town center, but it's something that's kind of been talked about from time to time, and it's difficult to try to do land use through caps and other things because there's usually better ways to get there. And that was specifically trying to look at preserving capacity on Highway 99W. And I think once all this settles down, and probably more appropriately once we go through our transportation system plan, which is something that we are, I think tomorrow night, are planning to hopefully get approval for the IGA to work with the state. I think that's probably the better time to do it, because then we can do some modeling and see, okay, well, did the cap do what it was expected to do? Is it still, effective in doing what we want it to do, and move forward? So I think that's probably better conversation to have as a transportation system plan is being discussed and implemented, which will probably be a year and a half from now. So,
Thanks, Tom.
Have you heard of light rail also being brought in? Like specifically, or is Metro just talking about it?
I think it's been dropped. It was certainly a part of the Southwest Corridor plan that was being put together. I'm pretty sure that they dropped light rail from consideration quite a while ago. They're still taking a look at bus rapid transit and to see whether that would be beneficial to Sherwood or not. But
I think the latest I thought I saw was light rail to Tualatin with some sort of bus transit between here and there.
They're talking, we vote on it actually on, I think, next week sometime. Light rail's not even in the picture.
Oh, completely out. Even to Tualatin?
Yeah, but
It is, but the costs are very prohibitive.
Yeah. But Damon brings up a good point, because it's not just about building new roads and making roads bigger. It's also about transit and changing the way that people tend to commute from different places. And there's other projects that we're working on as well, including Cedar Creek Trail, which will provide a backbone for a trail network so people can hopefully get out of their cars and walk or bike to work, as well as hopefully increase transit service. We're continuing to work on what we can do there to improve that. So.
Well, thank you for all of the efforts staff is making toward progress for our city. Unless there are any other comments, I think I will move to adjourn. And we are adjourned.